I am just a chronicler and welcome you to another video. Since I know many of you watch to relax and fall asleep, I thought it would be nice if you left a comment telling me where you're listening from and if it's raining there. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Now, it's time to get comfortable, relax, and begin. The first time I saw my own death in the fireplace, I thought I was losing my mind. Now, I'm not so sure that would have been the worst option. It started innocently enough. I'd rented this quaint little cabin in the woods to finish my novel. You know, the whole isolated writer. But hey, exist for a reason, right? I figured a month away from the city, from Twitter, from my agent's passive-aggressive emails about deadlines, it'd do me good. The place was perfect. All knotty pine and rustic charm, with a porch that wrapped around two sides and honest-to-God rocking chairs. Inside, it was cozy without feeling cramped. A compact kitchen, a bedroom just big enough for the queen-size bed, and the main room, living room, dining room, in my workspace, all in one. But the centerpiece, the thing that sold me on this particular cabin, the fireplace, floor-to-ceiling river rock, with a massive hearth and a mantel hewn from a single piece of ancient oak. It dominated the main room, promising warmth and that hypnotic dance of flames. That's better than any white noise app for lulling you into a creative trance. The first week was bliss. I'd wake up with the sun, make a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint, and write until my fingers cramped. Lunch was whatever I could scrounge up without taking my eyes off the screen. As evening settled in, I'd build a fire, pour a glass of whiskey, and edit until the words blurred. It was during one of these late-night editing sessions that it happened. I'd been staring at the same paragraph for what felt like hours, the sentences refusing to untangle themselves. Frustrated, I leaned back, my eyes drawn to the fire as they had been so many times before. The flames twisted and curled, that ever-shifting pattern that's mesmerizing and soothing all at once. I let my vision unfocus, hoping for that spark of inspiration that would break through my writer's block. Instead, I saw something else. At first, it was just a flicker, a shape in the flames that seemed more solid than the rest. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, certain it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, it was clearer. A scene playing out in the heart of the fire. I saw myself sitting in this very chair, illuminated by the glow of my laptop. But something was wrong. The me in the flames looked scared, panicked. I kept glancing over my shoulder, typing frantically. A shadow fell across Flame Me, and I watched myself spin around, mouth open in a silent scream. Then the vision vanished. The fire once again just fire. I sat there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Sleep deprivation, I told myself. Too much caffeine, too little real food. My writer's brain, overclocked and desperate for inspiration, conjuring up scenes from thin air. I shut the laptop, doused the fire, and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easy that night. The next day, I tried to push it out of my mind. I went for a long walk in the woods surrounding the cabin, breathing in the crisp autumn air, letting the crunch of leaves under my feet ground me in reality. By the time I got back, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. Almost. That night, I hesitated before lighting the fire. "Don't be ridiculous," I muttered to myself. "It's just a fireplace." I struck the match with more force than necessary, watched the kindling catch, and settled in to write. For a while, everything was normal. The fire crackled cheerfully, the words flowed, and that strange vision seemed like a distant, half-remembered dream. Then, during a lull in my typing, I heard it. A whisper, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I looked up, and the breath caught in my throat. There, in the flames, was another scene. This time, I saw myself pacing the cabin, phone pressed to my ear. I was gesturing wildly, my face a mask of frustration and fear. As I watched, flaming through the phone across the room, then sank to the floor, head in hands. The vision faded, but the whispers remained. I couldn't make out words, just a susurration like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" Silence. Just the normal pops and crackles of a fire. I ran a hand through my hair, my scalp prickling with unease. "Okay," I said aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even if it was just my own. "Okay, let's think about this logically. There's got to be an explanation." But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I hadn't drunk anything stronger than coffee in days. I wasn't on any medication. I'd been sleeping well, eating regularly. There was no reason for me to be hallucinating. Unless I glanced at my laptop, at the document full of half-formed ideas and fragments of plot. My novel, a psychological thriller about a woman who starts seeing visions of her own future, unable to tell if they're prophecies or signs of encroaching madness. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn night outside. Was I, somehow, manifesting my own story? Had I blurred the lines between fiction and reality without realizing it? I slammed the laptop shut and went to bed, leaving the fire to burn itself out. The next few days, I avoided the fireplace. I rode at the kitchen table or out on the porch when the weather allowed. I told myself I was just mixing things up, getting a new perspective. But every time I walked past that cold hearth, I felt it watching me. It was ridiculous, of course. It was just stone and ash and a little leftover soot. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting. Hungry. A week after that first vision, the nightmares started. I'd wake up gasping, images of flame and shadow tangled in my mind. In my dreams, I was always running, always looking over my shoulder for something I couldn't quite see. The lack of sleep started to take its toll. I'd find myself zoning out in the middle of the day, coming back to awareness with no memory of the time that had passed. My word count dropped, then stopped altogether. I'd open my laptop and stare at the blinking cursor, my mind a cluttered mess of half-formed ideas and nameless dread. It was during one of these foggy moments that I found myself in front of the fireplace, a lit match in my hand. I don't remember deciding to light it. I don't remember walking over here or gathering the kindling. But as I watched the small flame dance at the end of the match, I felt an overwhelming urge to see what the fire would show me this time. The wood caught quickly, eager, like it had been waiting for this moment. I sank into the armchair, eyes fixed on the growing flames. For a long while, nothing happened. Just the normal flicker and dance of the fire. I began to relax, to think that maybe it had all been in my imagination after all. Then the flames parted like a curtain, and I saw myself writing. The relief was so intense I almost cried. This is what I came here for, right? To write, to finish my novel. The me in the flames looked focused, intense, fingers flying over the keys. But as I watched, I noticed things. The way my shoulders were hunched, tense. The frequent glances at the door, the windows, the fear in my eyes. Flamey stopped typing, head cocked as if listening. Then, in a flurry of movement, I watched myself grab the laptop and run for the bedroom. The fire vision followed. and I saw myself shoving the computer under the bed, then rushing to close and lock the windows. There was a pounding on the cabin door. The scene dissolved. The fire once again, just fire. But the pounding continued. It took me far too long to realize it wasn't coming from the flames. Someone was at the door. Actually, at the door. Heart in my throat, I approached cautiously. "Who is it?" I called out, wincing at the tremor in my voice. "Forest Service, ma'am. Just doing a routine check on the cabins, making sure everything's all right." I hesitated, hand on the doorknob. His voice sounded normal, friendly even, but something kept me from opening the door. "Can I see some ID?" I asked. A pause, just a beat too long. "Of course, ma'am. If you could just open the door a crack, I'll hold it up for you." Every instinct screamed at me not to do it. "You know what?" I said, forcing a lightness I didn't feel into my tone. "I'm actually a bit under the weather. Could you come back tomorrow?" Another pause. When he spoke again, the friendly tone was gone. "Open the door." I backed away, my mind racing. The bedroom. Had to get to the laptop, call for help. The pounding resumed, harder this time. A crack appeared in the old wood. I ran. In the bedroom, I dropped to my knees, scrabbling under the bed for my computer. My fingers closed around it just as I heard the door splinter. Heavy footsteps. Getting closer. I opened the laptop with shaking hands, praying I had a signal. One bar, it would have to do. As I typed out a frantic email to my agent, the only person who knew exactly where I was. I heard him enter the room. I turned, and in the last moments before everything went dark, I realized why the man's voice had seemed so familiar. He was the caretaker who had given me the keys when I first arrived. The one who had told me, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Don't worry about the fireplace, miss. It'll show you everything you need to see." As consciousness faded, my last thought was of the fire. Of all the things it had shown me, and of all the things it hadn't. Story 2. You know that feeling when you're alone in a big house and you hear a noise you can't explain? That moment when your heart stops and your mind races through 1,000 possibilities, each worse than the last. Yeah, I used to think I knew that feeling. Turns out, I had no idea. It all started when Sarah and I bought our dream home. A gorgeous 2-story log cabin nestled in the pines. Far enough from civilization to feel like our own little world, but close enough that we could still get pizza delivered if we were feeling lazy. The realtor had gone on and on about the rustic charm and authentic frontier craftsmanship, but honestly, we were sold the moment we saw the fireplace. It was a beast of a thing, all river rock and rough-hewn timber, with a hearth big enough to roast a whole deer if we were so inclined we weren't. The chimney stretched up through both floors, a solid core of stone around which the whole house seemed to be built. "Think of the cozy nights we'll have," Sarah had said, her eyes sparkling as she imagined winter evenings curled up with hot cocoa and a good book. I'd wrapped my arms around her waist, breathing in the scent of pine and possibilities. "Think of how much we'll save on heating," I'd joked, earning myself an elbow to the ribs and a laugh that echoed off the high ceiling. God, I missed that laugh. The first few weeks were bliss. We'd spend our days unpacking, arranging, and rearranging furniture until everything was just so. In the evenings, we'd build a fire and talk about our plans for the place. A vegetable garden out back. Maybe a workshop in the old shed. Kids, someday. Their laughter filling these rooms. It was about a month in when I first heard it. Sarah was away at a conference, and I was enjoying some quality time with a cold beer and the game. As the fire died down to embers, I muted the TV during a commercial break. That's when I noticed the whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe the house settling. But as I listened, I realized it was coming from the fireplace. A soft, sibilant sound, like someone trying to get my attention without waking a sleeping baby. "Hello," I called out, feeling immediately foolish. Of course, no one answered. I was alone in the house, and the nearest neighbor was a good half-mile away. I turned the TV back on, cranking the volume a little higher than necessary. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. That someone, or something, was trying to tell me something. When Sarah got home the next day, I didn't mention it. What was I going to say? "Hey honey, I think our chimney is talking to me." She'd have me committed faster than you can say carbon monoxide poisoning. But over the next few weeks, it happened again and again. Always when I was alone, always just as the fire was dying down. Whispers that seemed to form words, but every time I thought I was close to understanding, they'd slip away like smoke. I started spending more time by the fireplace, telling Sarah I was working on my novel. In reality, I was straining to hear, to make sense of the voices that seemed to live in our chimney. One night, as autumn was giving way to winter, I finally caught a full sentence. Clear as day, like someone was standing right next to me. "She's not who you think she is." I nearly fell out of my chair. "What?" I said aloud, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Who's not, Sarah?" But the whispers had faded back to unintelligible murmurs. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as my mind raced. What did it mean? Sarah, my wife, my best friend, the woman I'd built this life with. I knew her better than I knew myself, didn't I? The next morning, over coffee, I found myself studying her. The way she buttered her toast, the little furrow between her brows as she scrolled through her phone. Was there something different about her? Something I'd missed? "Everything okay, babe?" she asked, catching me staring. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just didn't sleep great. Weird dreams." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Be poor baby. "Want me to make you some chamomile tea tonight? That always helps me sleep." I nodded, hating myself for the seed of doubt that had taken root in my mind. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside me, I crept downstairs. The fire had long since gone out, but I sat in front of the cold hearth anyway, waiting. "Hello," I whispered, feeling like an idiot. Is anyone there?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, so faint I almost missed it. "Look in the shed." My blood ran cold. The shed. We'd talked about turning it into a workshop, but it was still full of junk left by the previous owners. I'd been meaning to clean it out for weeks. With shaking hands, I pulled on my boots and coat. The night air was bitter cold, my breath forming clouds in front of me as I crossed the yard. The shed door creaked ominously as I pulled it open. At first glance, everything was as it should be. Old tools, dusty boxes, a tarp covering what was probably a rusty lawnmower. But as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed something odd. A patch of floor that looked newer than the rest. My heart pounding, I moved aside some boxes. There, unmistakable in the beam of my flashlight, was a trapdoor. I should have walked away. Should have gone back to bed, held my wife close, and forgotten all about whispers and secrets. But I didn't. I pulled open the trapdoor. The smell hit me first. Damp earth and something metallic. Rot, I gagged, stumbling backward, but not before my flashlight illuminated what was in that hole. A body, decomposed, but unmistakably human. I don't remember much of what happened next. I have flashes. running back to the house, Sarah's confused face as I babbled about voices and sheds and bodies. The arrival of the police, their grim faces as they cordoned off our yard. The worst part, Sarah didn't seem surprised. Shocked, yes. Horrified, of course, but not surprised. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me with eyes I no longer recognized. "I did it for us," she said. "You have to understand. It was the only way we could afford this place." The next few weeks were a blur of police interviews and sleepless nights. I learned more than I ever wanted to know about the previous owners. An elderly couple who had moved to Florida right before we bought the place. About Sarah's secret life, the debts she'd been hiding, the desperate measures she'd taken to give us the life she thought we deserved. I couldn't stay in the house. Not with the memories, not with the knowledge of what had happened just yards from where we'd dreamed of raising a family. I moved in with my sister, ignored the concerned looks, and whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. But I couldn't stay away forever. A month after everything fell apart, I went back. Just to pick up some clothes, I told myself. Just to see if any of it had been real. The house was cold, empty. Dust had already begun to settle on the furniture, like nature was trying to reclaim what we'd stolen. I stood in front of the fireplace, staring at the cold ashes. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why did you tell me?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, as gentle as a mother's lullaby, "Because you deserve to know the truth," I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face. But I loved her. "We were happy, were you?" the voice asked. And I realized with a start that it wasn't coming from the chimney anymore. It was all around me, in the walls, in the air itself. Or were you just pretending not to see the cracks? I didn't have an answer for that. Maybe I never would. As I left the house for the last time, a real estate sign already planted in the front yard, I couldn't help but wonder about the stories these walls had seen, the secrets they kept, about the fine line between love and willful blindness, and about the voices that whisper in the night, telling us truths we're not ready to hear. I don't know if I'll ever be able to sit by a fireplace again without listening for whispers in the flames, but I do know this. Sometimes, the most terrifying truths come not from ghosts or monsters, but from the people we think we know best. And sometimes, the only way to find peace is to burn it all down and start again. Story 3. I never believed in ghosts until I inherited my grandfather's cabin. Now, I'm not so sure what I believe anymore. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a crisp white envelope stark against the pile of bills and junk mail. I recognized the law firm's letterhead immediately, my stomach dropping. Grandpa Joe had been gone for 6 months, but seeing his name in cold, official print still felt like a punch to the gut. I skimmed the legalese, my eyes catching on phrases like sole beneficiary and property transfer. But it was the last line that made my heart skip a beat. The cabin and surrounding acreage are now yours. Dr. Amelie Chun, your grandfather's final wish was for you to continue the work. Continue the work. What the hell did that mean? 2 weeks later, I was bumping down a dirt road in rural Oregon, my Subaru packed with enough supplies to last a month. As an environmental scientist, I was used to remote field stations, but this was different. This was personal. The cabin appeared around a bend, and for a moment, I was 8 years old again, spending summers with Grandpa Joe, learning the names of trees and the songs of birds. It looked smaller now, the log walls weathered and grey, but still solid. Still home. I killed the engine and just sat there, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal, the whisper of wind through towering pines. Something moved in my peripheral vision. A deer, maybe, or a coyote. When I turned to look, There was nothing there. The key was under the mat, just like always. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and memories. Grandpa's old flannel jacket still hung by the door. His reading glasses sat on the coffee table next to a stack of leather-bound journals. I ran my fingers over the spines, years of my grandfather's neat handwriting labeling each one. The most recent was dated just weeks before he died. Curious, I picked it up, flipping to a random page. Grandpa's usually meticulous script was shaky, urgent. The forest is changing. Faster now. She's trying to tell me something, but I can't. I don't understand. Amelia needs to see. Amelia will know. I frowned. Grandpa Joe had always been a bit eccentric, but this sounded like the ramblings of a man losing touch with reality. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. I jumped, my heart racing. Get it together, Amelia, I chided myself. You're a scientist, for crying out loud. I spent the rest of the day settling in, unpacking my clothes and research equipment. As the sun set, I built a fire, more for comfort than warmth. Curled up in Grandpa's old armchair, I began reading the journals in earnest. The early entries were what I expected. Detailed observations of forest health, wildlife patterns, the slow dance of ecological succession. But as the years progressed, things got weird. Grandpa wrote about trees that moved when no one was looking, animals behaving in impossible ways, and through it all, a sense that the forest itself was alive, aware, trying to communicate. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake. The fire burned down to embers. Something had woken me. A sound, a movement. There it was again. A whisper, so faint I might have imagined it, coming from the fireplace. Amelia. I was on my feet in an instant, heart pounding. Hello, my voice sounded small, scared. Is someone there? Silence. Just the normal pops and crackles of a dying fire. I shook my head, laughing nervously. Nice going, Ames. Scare yourself with ghost stories, why don't you? But as I turned to head to bed, I caught a glimpse of something in the window. A face, pale and indistinct, watching me from the darkness outside. I blinked, and it was gone. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The next morning, I threw myself into work, determined to ignore the creeping unease that had settled over me. I sat at my laptop, reviewed Grandpa's most recent data, and headed out to check his research plots. The forest was beautiful, sunlight filtering through the canopy, the air rich with the scent of pine and loam. But as I hiked deeper into the woods, that beauty took on an edge. The silence felt expectant, like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I found the first plot easily enough, marked with Grandpa's old surveyor's tape. But what I saw there made no sense. The trees were wrong. Not just a little off, but fundamentally, impossibly wrong. Species that shouldn't be able to grow in this climate. Growth rates that defied everything I knew about forest ecology. I checked my coordinates. Sure, I must have made a mistake. But no, this was the right spot. Which meant a branch snapped behind me. I whirled around, but there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows. Hello, I called out, hating how my voice shook. Is anyone there? The forest answered with silence. I hurried back to the cabin, my mind racing. There had to be a logical explanation. Bad data, mislabeled plots, anything but what Grandpa's journal suggested. As I approached the clearing, I stopped short. For a moment, just a moment, the cabin looked different, older. Wild vines crept up the walls, the windows dark and empty. I blinked, and it was normal again. Inside, I poured myself a generous glass of whiskey, trying to steady my nerves. The journal sat on the coffee table, suddenly ominous. I don't know what made me do it. Scientific curiosity, morbid fascination. But I found myself opening the oldest journal, flipping to the first page. The handwriting wasn't my grandfather's. June 15th, 1872. The forest speaks. God help me, but it speaks. I slammed the book shut, my hands shaking. That was impossible. The cabin had been built in the 1950s. Grandpa Joe had been the first and only owner, hadn't he? The fire flared suddenly, startlingly bright. In the flames, I saw something, a face, a figure, Amelia. The whisper again, clearer now. See? I scrambled backward, knocking over my glass. Whiskey soaked into the rug as I stared, transfixed, at the fireplace. The flames seemed to part like a curtain, revealing a scene that couldn't be real. The cabin, but not the cabin. Older, wilder. A man sat at a rough-hewn table, writing frantically in a journal that looked disturbingly familiar. He looked up, straight at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. "You see it too," he said. Not a question. I nodded, unable to speak. He smiled, sad and knowing. "Then it's time. The forest has chosen you, as it chose me, as it chose all of us. All of, who are you?" But the vision was already fading, the flames once again just flames. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the fireplace, my mind reeling. It wasn't until I noticed the grey light of dawn creeping through the windows that I realized I'd been up all night. Moving on autopilot, I made coffee, stronger than usual. As the rich aroma filled the cabin, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen, what I thought I'd seen. There had to be a rational explanation. Stress, lack of sleep. Maybe I'd accidentally ingested some hallucinogenic fungi while out in the field. Anything was more plausible than what? Time-traveling ghosts. A sentient, talking forest. I laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet morning. "Get it together, Amelia," I muttered. "You're a scientist, for God's sake." But as I raised the mug to my lips, I froze. There, on the window above the sink, words were appearing, as if written by an invisible hand. "Science is just the beginning. Open your mind, Amelia. The forest is waiting." The mug slipped from my fingers, shattering on the floor. Coffee splashed my bare feet, but I barely noticed. I was too busy staring at the window, watching as the words faded like morning mist. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone. My department head, the police, a psychiatrist. But as my fingers hovered over the keypad, I hesitated. What would I even say? "Hi, I think my dead grandfather's cabin is haunted by a bunch of ghost scientists. And also the forest is alive and trying to talk to me." They'd have me committed before I could finish the sentence. "No," a voice whispered in my mind. A voice that sounded disturbingly like my own, but older, wiser. "You know what you need to do." I did. God help me, but I did. I put down the phone. I picked up the journals. All of them, not just Grandpa Joe's. And I walked out into the forest. The trees seemed to part before me, sunlight dappling a path I'd never seen before. As I walked, I felt something shift. Not in the forest, but in me. Like a veil lifting, revealing a world I'd always seen, but never understood. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to lose meaning. But eventually, I found myself in a clearing I was certain hadn't been there yesterday. In the center stood an ancient tree, its trunk wider than my cabin. As I approached, I saw that the bark was covered in writing. Hundreds, thousands of names and dates, stretching back centuries. My hand moved of its own accord, tracing the letters of the most recent entry. Joseph Chun, 1958 to 2023. Beneath it, a space, waiting. I understood then. The legacy, the work. It wasn't about data or papers or scientific breakthroughs. It was about listening, about seeing, about being a bridge between two worlds. With a steady hand, I took out my pen and added my own name to the tree. Amelia Chun, 2023. The end date, I realized, was up to me. Up to the forest. As I stepped back, the whispers started again. But this time, I understood, and I began to write. Story 4. I've always found peace in the wilderness. But after what happened on the Whispering Pines Trail, I don't think I'll ever feel safe in the woods again. It was supposed to be a simple 5-day solo trek through Blackwater National Park. I'd done dozens like it before. Just me, my pack, and miles of unspoiled nature. But from the moment I stepped onto that trail, something felt off. The ranger at the trailhead had given me an odd look when I signed in. Whispering Pines, huh? He'd said, his weathered face creasing into a frown. You sure about that? A lot of folks been reporting strange things up there lately. I'd laughed it off. Strange how, Bigfoot sightings. He didn't smile back. Just keep your wits about you, miss. And if anything feels wrong, you turn right around and come back here. You hear? I should have listened. God, I should have listened. The first day was uneventful enough. The trail wound through old-growth forest, massive pines towering overhead, their branches creaking in the wind. As the sun began to set, I found a nice clearing and set up camp. That's when I noticed the first cairn. It was just a small stack of rocks, the kind hikers often leave as trail markers. But I could have sworn it wasn't there when I'd chosen the spot. And something about the way the stones were balanced seemed unnatural, like they were defying gravity. I shook off the uneasy feeling and got into my tent. But sleep didn't come easy that night. The wind in the trees sounded almost like whispers, and more than once, I could have sworn I heard footsteps circling my camp. When I unzipped the tent the next morning, the cairn was gone. I told myself I must have imagined it. Tricks of light and shadow, an overactive imagination fueled by that ranger's cryptic warning. I packed up and hit the trail, determined to enjoy my hike. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned a bend in the trail, I expected to see someone or something standing there. But there was never anything. Just trees and shadows and that constant, maddening whisper on the wind. I made camp earlier than usual that night, my nerves frayed. As I was gathering firewood, I saw it. Another cairn. This one larger, more elaborate. And definitely, absolutely not there a minute ago. My hands shook as I snapped a picture with my phone. Proof that I wasn't going crazy. But when I looked back up, the cairn had changed. The rocks were arranged in a different pattern now, like a crude arrow pointing deeper into the woods. I nearly fell over backwards, scrambling away from it. My heart pounding, I ran back to my tent and zipped myself in, as if a thin layer of nylon could protect me from what? Rocks that moved on their own. I tried to convince myself it was just other hikers messing with me, but I hadn't seen another soul on the trail all day. And in my guts, I knew this was something else. Something older. something that didn't want me here. I barely slept that night, every snapping twig and rustling leaf setting my nerves on edge. When dawn finally broke, I made a decision. To hell with the 5-day plan. I was getting off this trail. I packed up quickly, not even bothering with breakfast. But as I shouldered my bag, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't remember which way I'd come from. The trail, so clear yesterday, seemed to have vanished overnight. In every direction, the forest looked identical. Endless pines stretching into misty distance. "Okay," I said aloud, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Okay, don't freak out. You've got this." I pulled out my phone to check the GPS. No signal, of course. My compass, then. I dug it out of my pack, but as soon as I opened it, I knew something was wrong. The needle was spinning wildly, as if there were magnetic interference. But that was impossible out here, wasn't it? A movement caught my eye. There, about 50 yards away, was a cairn. Larger than the others, it seemed to beckon. Against my better judgment, I approached it. As I got closer, I saw there was something nestled among the rocks. My breath caught in my throat. It was my compass, the one that was supposed to be in my hand. I looked down. My hand was empty. "What the F?" I choked out, stumbling backward. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my heart hammering. Nothing, just trees and mist. But as I turned back to the cairn, I saw that it had changed again. The rocks were now arranged in a rough humanoid shape, like a crude stick figure. And balanced on top was my phone, which I knew for a fact was in my pocket. My hand shaking, I reached into my pocket, empty. "Okay," I said, my voice high and tight with fear. "Okay, whoever's doing this, it's not funny anymore. Please, just let me go." The forest answered with silence. Not even the wind whispered now. I don't know what made me do it. Morbid curiosity, desperation. But I found myself reaching for the phone atop the cairn. The moment my fingers touched it, the screen lit up. There was a new photo album, titled Simply Look. With a sense of creeping dread, I opened it. The first image made me gasp. It was me, setting up my tent that first night. Taken from the tree line, as if someone, or something, had been watching. I swiped to the next photo. Me, sleeping in my tent. The image taken from directly above, as if the photographer had been floating in mid-air. Another swipe. Me, gathering firewood. But in the background, half hidden behind a tree, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, its skin the color and texture of bark. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone, but I couldn't stop swiping. Photo after photo, each one closer, each one revealing more of the thin thing that had been stalking me. In the final image, it was standing right behind me as I slept, its long, branch-like fingers reaching for my face. A sob escaped my throat. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. I looked up from the phone, desperate to ground myself in reality. But the reality I saw was worse than any nightmare. The forest had changed. The trees were closer now, their branches reaching toward me like grasping hands. And carved into every trunk, over and over again, was a single word. "Stay, no," I whispered, then louder, "No, I don't want to stay. Let me go." A wind whipped up, carrying that maddening whisper. But this time, I could make out words. "You belong to us." Now, I ran. I didn't know where I was going, Didn't care. I just knew I had to get away. Branches whipped at my face, roots seemed to reach up to trip me. But I kept running. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. My lungs were on fire, my legs trembling with exhaustion. But every time I thought I'd found a way out, the trees would shift, herding me back in. As the sun began to set, I collapsed, my body refusing to go any further. Curled up on the forest floor, I began to sob. This was it. This was how I was going to die. A twig snapped nearby. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I raised my head. There, not 10 feet away, stood the figure from the photos. Up close, I could see that what I'd thought was bark-like skin was actually made up of thousands of tiny, writhing insects. Its face, if you could call it that, was a hollow mask of knots and whirls. As I watched, frozen in terror, it raised one long, spindly arm. Pointing, I followed its gesture, and there, through a gap in the trees, I saw it. The trailhead. Salvation. I looked back at the creature, uncomprehending. You're letting me go, it didn't speak. But in my mind, I heard that whisper again. Not yours. Yet, I didn't need to be told twice. Summoning strength I didn't know I had, I staggered to my feet and ran for the trailhead. I burst out of the tree line, gasping, expecting any moment to feel those twiggy fingers close around my neck. But nothing grabbed me. The ranger from before was there, his eyes widening as he saw me. Jesus, lady, what happened to you? I tried to speak, to warn him about what was in those woods. But no words would come. I simply collapsed, the world going dark around me. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital. They told me I was severely dehydrated, my body covered in cuts and bruises. When I tried to tell them what happened, they exchanged worried looks. Post-traumatic stress, they said. Hallucinations brought on by exposure and exhaustion. Maybe they're right. God, I hope they're right. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can still hear those whispers. And every time I see a stack of stones, no matter where I am, my blood runs cold, because I know the truth. The woods let me go that day, but only so I could spread their invitation to others. So let me ask you, have you ever hiked the Whispering Pines Trail? Would you like to? Story 5. I've always been a creature of habit, but I never thought my routines would be the death of me, until the day he moved in next door. It started innocently enough. A moving truck rumbled down our quiet suburban street on a crisp Saturday morning, parking in front of the Ferguson's old place. I was out front, trimming the hedges, 9 a.m. sharp, just like every Saturday for the past decade. The man who hopped out of the passenger seat looked normal enough. Mid-30s, neatly pressed khakis, a blue polo shirt that matched the cloudless sky. He waved as he caught me looking. "Morning, neighbor," he called out, his voice carrying a hint of a southern drawl. "I'm Jack Pearson." I set down my shears and walked over, wiping my palms on my jeans before extending a hand. "Tom Bradshaw, welcome to Maple Street." His handshake was firm, his smile wide, but there was something about his eyes. A little too bright, a little too focused. I chalked it up to the stress of moving and went back to my hedges. If I'd known then what I know now, I'd have run screaming down the street. The first week was uneventful. Jack seemed to be settling in well. I'd see him leaving for work at 8:15 every morning, briefcase in hand, travel mug of coffee, carefully balanced. He'd return at 6:05 p.m., like clockwork. It wasn't until the second Sunday that I noticed something odd. I was taking out the trash to 7 p.m., same as always, when I saw Jack doing the exact same thing. Down to the way he held the bag, the little hop step he did to clear the bottom porch step. Great minds think alike, Tom, he called out with a laugh. I chuckled weakly, a strange unease settling in my stomach. It was just a coincidence, right? But the coincidences kept piling up. Tuesday evening, I fired up the grill for my weekly burger night. The smell of propane and searing meat filled the air. And then, drifting over the fence, came the unmistakable aroma of grilling burgers from Jack's yard. I peered over the fence, my spatula hanging limply in my hand. There was Jack, standing in front of an identical grill, wearing the same kiss the cook apron I had on. He looked up, that too bright smile gleaming in the twilight. Nothing beats a good burger on a Tuesday night, right, neighbor? I mumbled something in agreement and retreated inside, my appetite suddenly gone. The next morning, I decided to switch things up. Instead of my usual 6:30 a.m. jog, I left the house at 6:15. I turned the corner onto Elm Street, feeling a little silly for being spooked by a few coincidences. And there was Jack, jogging towards me, wearing running shoes identical to mine. "Tom," he called out, not even slightly out of breath. "Didn't know you were an early bird too. Great minds, huh?" I gave a tight smile and picked up my pace, my heart racing for more than just exertion. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind spinning with paranoid theories. Was Jack copying me on purpose? But why? It didn't make any sense. At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed the living room window, a movement caught my eye. There, illuminated by the pale moonlight, was Jack, standing in his own living room, staring directly at my house. When he saw me, he raised his hand in a friendly wave, as if this was a totally normal thing to be doing in the middle of the night. I dropped to the floor, my heart pounding. This wasn't just weird anymore. This was terrifying. The next few days, I did everything I could to break my routines. I ordered takeout instead of cooking. I skipped my morning jog. I even called in sick to work, something I hadn't done in years. But every time I peeked out the window, there was Jack, mirroring what should have been my actions. Grilling when I would have grilled, jogging when I would have jogged, leaving for work at exactly 8:15, even though I was huddled on my couch in pajamas. It was like he was living my life, the life I would have been living if I hadn't changed everything. By Friday, I was a wreck. Dark circles under my eyes, jumping at every sound. I knew I should call the police, but what would I say? My neighbor is copying my routine. They'd laugh me out of the station. As I was contemplating my options, the doorbell rang. I froze, knowing exactly who it would be. "Tom, you in there, neighbor?" Jack's voice, cheerful as ever. "I notice you've been a bit under the weather. Thought I'd bring over some chicken soup. Always does the trick for me." I didn't answer. Maybe if I stayed quiet, he'd go away. "Come on, Tom. I know you're home. Your car's in the driveway." Shit. I crept to the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. I opened it just a crack, the security chain still in place. Jack stood there, a Tupperware container in his hands, that unnervingly bright smile plastered on his face. "There you are. Was starting to worry about you, buddy." "Thanks, Jack," I managed to croak out. "But I'm fine. Really." He cocked his head, his eyes boring into mine. "Are you sure? You don't look so good. Maybe I should come in, keep you company for a bit." "No," I said, too quickly. "I mean, no thank you. I just need some rest." His smile never wavered, but something cold flashed in his eyes. "If you say so, neighbor. But remember, I'm right next door if you need anything. Anything at all." I shut the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely slide the lock into place. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. I turned, slowly, dreading what I might see. There, on my mantel, was a framed photo I knew I'd never seen before. It showed Jack and me, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like old friends. The backdrop looked like my backyard, but I had no memory of this picture ever being taken. My legs gave out and I slid to the floor, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. A soft chuckle made me look up. Jack was standing in my living room, though I never heard the door open. "Oh, Tom," he said, shaking his head like a disappointed parent. "I really thought we could do this the easy way." How did you get in here?" I stammered. He smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it now. "I'm always in here, Tom. I'm always everywhere you are, because I am you. Or rather, I will be." I scrambled backward, my back hitting the wall. "What are you talking about? What are you?" Jack, or the thing pretending to be Jack, crouched down in front of me. "I'm the next version. The upgrade. The you that's going to take over when you're obsolete." His face began to shift, features melting and reforming. I watched in horror as my own face emerged, like a photo slowly developing. "You see, Tom," my own voice said, coming from the creature's mouth, "reality needs to be refreshed every now and then. Old versions deleted, new ones installed. It's nothing personal. It's just maintenance." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only watch as not Jack, not me, reached out with a hand that was somehow both solid and insubstantial. "Don't worry," it said, its fingers inching closer to my forehead. "You won't feel a thing, and I'll take good care of your life. Our life." The moment its fingers touched my skin, the world flickered, like a computer screen refreshing. When everything stabilized, I found myself standing in my front yard, hedge trimmers in hand, 9 a.m., Saturday morning. A moving truck rumbled down the street, parking in front of the house next door. A man hopped out, mid-30s, khaki pants, blue polo shirt. "Morning, neighbor," he called out, wavering. "I'm Tom Bradshaw." I felt my mouth stretch into a wide smile, my hand raising in an automatic wave. "Jack Pearson," I heard myself say. "Welcome to Maple Street." As I watched Not Tom head into his new home, I felt a flicker of something. A memory. A warning, but it faded as quickly as it came. After all, I had hedges to trim. It was 9 a.m. on a Saturday, and I always trim my hedges at 9 a.m. on Saturdays. Always have. Always will. At least until the next upgrade. Story 6. I never thought I'd die in an elevator. Crushed, mangled, or plummeting to my death, sure. But slowly going insane while trapped between floors. That wasn't on my list of ways to go. Yet here I am, and I'm starting to think death might be the easy way out. It started like any other late night at the office. I'm Sarah Chung, Junior Associate at Bradbury and Holt Law, and burning the midnight oil is practically in my job description. The clock on my desktop read 11:43 p.m. when I finally called it quits. My eyes burning from staring at contracts for the past 14 hours. The office was a ghost town. The usual bustle replaced by the low hum of air conditioning and the occasional distant ping of an elevator. I packed up my laptop, straightened my wrinkled blouse in a futile attempt at professionalism, and headed for the elevators. Our offices take up the top 10 floors of the Chrysler building. Yeah, that Chrysler building. Normally, I love the view. Tonight, as I waited for the elevator, the twinkling city lights felt more mocking than magical. The elevator dinged, doors sliding open with a soft whoosh. Empty, thank God. I'm not really in the mood for small talk at midnight on a Tuesday. I stepped in, jabbing the lobby button with maybe a little more force than necessary. The doors closed, and I leaned against the mirrored wall, closing my eyes for just a moment. That's when it happened. A jolt, violent enough to make me stumble. A screech of metal on metal that set my teeth on edge. And then, nothing. I opened my eyes. The elevator was dark, emergency lights casting an eerie blue glow. The floor indicator above the door was stuck between 37 and 38. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, fumbling for my phone. No service, of course. Because why would anything go right tonight? I found the emergency call button, pressing it with a sense of relief. A crackle of static, then a bored voice. Maintenance. "Hi, I'm stuck in elevator 3B. Between floors 37 and 38, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "All right, ma'am. We'll have someone take a look. Sit tight." The line went dead before I could ask how long it might take. I slid down the wall, resigning myself to a wait. That's when I noticed the first weird thing. In the dim blue light, my reflection in the mirrored walls looked off. Not drastically, but enough to make me do a double take. Was my hair always parted on that side? Were my eyes always that wide? I shook my head, chalking it up to stress and bad lighting. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Minutes ticked by, feeling more like hours. The air in the elevator grew stuffy, and I found myself checking my phone obsessively, watching the battery drain with no signal in sight. A sound caught my attention. A soft scraping, like fingernails on metal. I held my breath, listening. There it was again, seeming to come from above the elevator car. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" Maintenance. No response. Just that scraping sound, moving now. Down the walls. Across the floor. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. "This isn't funny," I yelled, trying to sound braver than I felt. "If someone's there, answer me." Silence. Then so faint, I almost missed it. A whisper. "Sarah." I whirled around, searching for the source. But the elevator was empty. Just me and my reflections, staring back with wide, frightened eyes. Wait, reflections? Plural? I blinked, and the mirrors were normal again. Just me, pale and disheveled, illuminated by that ghostly blue light. I was losing it. Had to be. Stress and claustrophobia and lack of sleep, playing tricks on my mind. I pressed the emergency button again, more insistently this time. "Maintenance," came that same bored voice. "Hi, yes, I called earlier about being stuck in elevator 3B. Is someone coming?" A pause. "Ma'am, we haven't had any calls about stuck elevators tonight." My blood ran cold. "But I just called you, like 20 minutes ago." "I'm sorry, but there's no record of that call. What floor did you say you were on?" "Between 37 and 38, I said, my voice rising in pitch. "Please, you have to help me. There's something wrong with this elevator. I keep hearing noises, and the mirrors, Mum." The voice cut me off, suddenly sharp. "The Chrysler building only has 36 floors. The line went dead. I stared at the emergency button, my mind reeling. That couldn't be right. I worked on the 40th floor. I knew that as surely as I knew my own name, didn't I? A movement caught my eye, and I turned to the mirrors. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw someone standing behind me. A woman, her face hidden by long, dark hair. I spun around, but the elevator was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, it was just me again. But my reflection, something was wrong. Its movements were just a fraction of a second too slow, like a video slightly out of sync. "This isn't real," I said aloud, my voice sounding unfamiliar in the confined space. "This can't be real." As if in response, the elevator shuddered. The lights flickered, plunging me into total darkness for a heart-stopping moment before the blue emergency lights sputtered back to life. And that's when I saw them. Words scrawled across the mirrored walls in what looked disturbingly like blood. "Not real, are you sure?" I screamed, pressing myself into the corner as far from the writing as possible in the small space. This couldn't be happening. It was a dream, a hallucination, anything but real. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 10, sure that when I opened them, everything would be normal. 1, 2, 3. That scraping sound again, closer now. 4, 5, 6. A whisper, right by my ear. "Open your eyes, Sarah." 7, 8, 9. The sensation of cold fingers on the back of my neck. 10. I opened my eyes. The elevator was bigger. Impossibly, illogically bigger. The mirrored walls stretched into darkness, the ceiling lost in shadow. And everywhere I looked, reflections. Hundreds of them, thousands, each one slightly different. Some with longer hair, some with scars I didn't have, one with eyes that were completely black. And they were all moving independently, watching me with expressions ranging from curiosity to hunger. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I pounded on the elevator doors, but they felt soft now, yielding like flesh under my fists. What is this? I managed to choke out. What's happening to me? A laugh echoed through the impossible space, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Oh, Sarah," my own voice said, though my lips weren't moving. "Haven't you figured it out yet? You're not trapped in an elevator." I turned, slowly, dreading what I might see. There, in the center of the expanded space, stood me, but not me. Her smile was too wide, her eyes too bright. "You're trapped in the space between realities," Not said. "And we've been waiting for you for a very, very long time." She gestured, and suddenly all the reflections were moving, stepping out of their mirrors, advancing towards me with hungry eyes and grasping hands. "You see," Sarah Notme continued, her voice echoing strangely, "every decision you make creates a new reality, a new you. But those realities, those yous, they have to go somewhere. And sometimes they want to come back." I pressed myself against the elevator doors, feeling them give slightly under my weight. "This isn't real," I whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Notme's smile widened impossibly further. "Oh, it's real. More real than you can imagine. And now, it's time for you to make room for the rest of us." The other reflections were upon me now, their hands cold as they grabbed at my clothes, my hair, my skin. I felt myself being pulled in 1,000 different directions, my very being starting to unravel. As the world began to fade around me, the last thing I heard was my own voice, multiplied 1,000-fold. "Don't worry, Sarah. We'll take good care of your life. All of them. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. Sarah Chun stepped out into the lobby of the Chrysler building, straightening her perfectly pressed blouse. She smiled at the night security guard as she passed. "Working late again, Ms. Chun," he called out. "You know me, Jerry," she replied with a laugh. "Always burning the midnight oil." As she pushed through the revolving doors into the cool night air, she paused for just a moment, looking back at her reflection in the polished brass. For a split second, she could have sworn she saw something else looking back. 1,000 somethings, with hungry eyes and grasping hands. But then she blinked, and it was just her. Same as always. Sarah Chun shook her head, chuckling at her overactive imagination, and stepped out into the New York night. After all, it had been a long day. She was probably just tired, wasn't she? Story 7. The first time I got a tip about the Lakeside Strangler, I was thrilled. By the 10th, I was terrified. Now, I'm not sure I'll live to see the 11th. My name's Megan Reeves, and I host a true crime podcast called Cold Case Chronicles. It's not exactly serial or my favorite murder, but I've got a decent following. Enough to quit my day job as a paralegal and do this full-time anyway. The Lakeside Strangler case had been my white whale for years. 3 women murdered in the summer of 1989, all found strangled on the shores of Lake Michigan. The case went cold faster than a Chicago winter, and 30 years later, it was all but forgotten, except by me. I'd been digging into the case for months, poring over old police reports, interviewing retired cops, the whole 9 yards. But I kept hitting dead ends. It was frustrating as hell, but hey, that's the nature of cold cases, right? Then came the first email. It pinged into my inbox at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. The subject line read, "Lakeside Strangler. You're looking in the wrong place." Now, I get a lot of emails from armchair detectives who think they've cracked every unsolved case from Jack the Ripper to usually it's a load of crap. But something about this one made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The email was short, just 2 lines. Check the victim's jewelry. The killer left his mark. No signature, no return address. Just an anonymous tip from a throwaway email account. I'll admit, I was skeptical. But I was also desperate for any lead, no matter how small. So I dug back into the evidence logs, focusing on the victim's personal effects. And there it was. Each victim had been wearing a necklace when they were found. And each necklace had a tiny, almost imperceptible scratch on the clasp. The same scratch, in the same place. How the hell had the police missed this? More importantly, how did my anonymous tipper know about it? I reported my findings on the next episode of the podcast, careful not to reveal my source. The response was immediate. My download numbers skyrocketed, and suddenly, Cold Case Chronicles was trending on Twitter. Then came the second email. "Good work. Now look into Detective Michael Brannigan." He knew more than he let on. My heart was racing as I started digging. Brannigan had been the lead detective on the case back in '89. He'd retired years ago and passed away in 2015. But as I started asking around, a picture emerged of a cop who might have had something to hide. Off-the-record conversations with his old colleagues hinted at a drinking problem. Unexplained absences during the investigation, a sudden influx of cash right after the case went cold. It wasn't proof of anything, but it was enough to fuel another explosive episode of the podcast. The emails kept coming, every few days, like clockwork. Each one contained a new piece of the puzzle, a new thread to pull. And with each revelation, my podcast grew more popular. But as the case started coming together, A creeping unease settled over me. How did this person know so much? Why were they only coming forward now, 3 decades later? And why me? I tried tracing the emails, but whoever was sending them knew how to cover their tracks. The IP addresses were all over the place. VPNs, I figured. I even hired a tech guy to help, but he came up empty-handed. Whoever this is, he told me, shaking his head, they're good. Really good. By the 8th email, I was starting to feel like I was being watched. I'd be working late in my home office, and I'd swear I could hear footsteps outside my window. I'd go to the coffee shop where I like to write, and I'd feel eyes on the back of my neck. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the case and the sudden fame were getting to me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The 9th email was different. Instead of a tip about the case, it was a photo of me, sleeping in my bed. The timestamp showed it had been taken last night. I called the police, of course. They took a report, promised to look into it. But without any proof of who was sending the emails, there wasn't much they could do. Change your locks, the officer suggested with a shrug. Maybe get a security system. I did both, but it didn't help. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being toyed with, that I was a mouse in some sick cat's game. But I couldn't stop. I was too close to the truth. I could feel it, just out of reach. The 10th email arrived yesterday. No photo this time, just 5 words that made my blood run cold. I'm coming to meet you, Megan. I haven't slept since. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car, sends my heart racing. I've got 911 on speed dial and a baseball bat by my bed, but somehow I don't think it'll be enough, because I've finally figured it out. Why the emails? Why me? Why now? It's not about solving the case. It's about finishing what was started 30 years ago. The Lakeside Strangler isn't gone. He's been here all along, watching, waiting, and now he's found his next victim. Me. I'm writing this now, not because I think it'll save me, but because I need someone to know the truth. If you're reading this, it means I was right. It means I'm probably already dead. But maybe, just maybe, it also means the bastard finally slipped up. So please, whoever you are, don't let this be the end. Don't let my death be in vain. Finish what I started. Solve the case. Catch the killer. And whatever you do, don't trust the emails. The sound of breaking glass downstairs snaps me back to the present. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely type. But I have to finish this. I have to get the truth out. I can hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, coming up the stairs. The floorboard outside my office creaks. The same one that always catches me when I'm trying to sneak a midnight snack. I should run. I should scream. I should do something. Anything. But I'm frozen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Because I've just realized something that turns my blood to ice. The footsteps. They sound familiar. Too familiar. No, it can't be. It's impossible. The door handle turns, slowly, achingly slowly. I want to close my eyes, but I can't look away. The door swings open, and I'm staring at myself, but not myself. This version of me is older, harder. Her eyes are cold, her smile cruel. She's holding a length of rope in hands that look too much like mine. "Hello, Megan," she says, and her voice is mine, but not mine. I've been waiting a long time for this. I try to speak, but no words come out. My mind is reeling, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. Confused, Not Me asks, her head tilting in a way that's so familiar it makes me nauseous. I don't blame you. Time travel's a bitch to wrap your head around. She steps into the room, and I finally find my voice. Who? What are you? Her laugh is bitter, hollow. I'm you, dummy. About 30 years from now. And I'm here to make sure you become me. But the lakeside strangler was me. Is me, will be you. She shrugs, as if discussing the weather and not multiple murders. It's a closed loop, see. I killed those women because I remembered being here, now, meeting myself. And now I'm here to make sure it happens. I shake my head, trying to deny what I'm hearing. No, I'd never. I won't become you. Her smile widens, and I see a glint of madness in eyes that are mirror images of my own. Oh, but you will. Because if you don't, neither of us will exist. And trust me, sweetie, non-existence is way worse than being a killer. She advances, the rope swinging gently in her hand. I should run, fight, do something. But I'm paralyzed, caught in the gravity of this impossible moment. Don't worry, she says, and for a second I see a flicker of something like regret in her eyes. It gets easier. And hey, think of the podcast material. As the rope tightens around my neck, as the world starts to go dark around the edges, one last horrifying thought flits through my mind. I'm going to survive this. I'm going to live to become her. And the real horror is just beginning. The next morning, a new episode of Cold Case Chronicles drops. In it, a shaken but determined Megan Reeves reveals a shocking breakthrough in the Lakeside Strangler case. Download numbers break all previous records. And somewhere, somewhen, a woman who both is and isn't Megan Reeves smiles, knowing the loop is closed once again. The game begins anew. Story 8. The ocean has always been my refuge, but after that night, I can't even look at a glass of water without shaking. They say the sea holds ancient secrets. I never expected to become one of them. It was a scorching August evening, the kind where the air feels thick enough to chew. I'd spent the day cooped up in my stuffy apartment, trying to write my thesis and failing miserably. By sunset, I was crawling out of my skin, desperate for some relief. That's when the idea hit me. A night swim. The beach was only a 10-minute drive away, and at this hour, it would be deserted. Perfect for clearing my head and cooling off. I threw on my swim trunks, grabbed a towel, and headed out. The drive was quick, the roads empty except for the occasional raccoon scurrying across the asphalt. As I pulled into the beach parking lot, I noticed I was the only car there. A little voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe this wasn't such a good idea, but I brushed it off. I'd been swimming here since I was a kid. What could possibly go wrong? The sand was still warm under my feet as I made my way down to the water's edge. The moon was full, casting a silvery path across the gently rolling waves. It was beautiful, peaceful. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension start to melt away. That's when I saw him. At first I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the moonlight. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a figure, standing at the water's edge, about 50 yards down the beach. Just standing there, staring out at the ocean. I squinted, trying to make out details, but all I could see was a dark silhouette. Maybe another night swimmer. But something about the way they stood, so still, sent a shiver down my spine despite the warm night air. I shook it off. Public beach, right. No reason to get spooked by someone else enjoying the night. I waded into the water, sighing with relief as the cool waves lapped at my skin. I dove under, relishing the sensation of weightlessness, of all my worries being washed away. When I surfaced, I instinctively looked back towards the beach. The figure was closer now, maybe 30 yards away. Still just standing there, but now it seemed to be facing my direction. My heart rate picked up a notch. Had they moved, or was it just my imagination? I treaded water, trying to get a better look, but the moonlight played tricks on my eyes, making it hard to focus. "Hello," I called out, immediately feeling foolish. Of course, they couldn't hear me from this far out. No response. Just the gentle lapping of waves and the distant cry of a seagull. I decided to swim parallel to the shore for a bit, putting some distance between myself and the strange figure. The water was perfect, cool but not cold, and I soon lost myself in the rhythm of my strokes. After a few minutes, I stopped to catch my breath. That's when I realized two things, both of which made my blood run cold. First, I was much further out than I'd intended. The shore was a good 100 yards away now, the beach a thin strip of pale sand. Second, the figure was in the water. It stood waist deep in the waves, closer to me than to the shore, and it was definitely looking right at me. Panic surged through me. This wasn't right. People don't just stand in the ocean at night, staring at strangers. I needed to get out of here. I turned and started swimming towards the shore, no longer caring about form or efficiency, just wanting to get away as fast as possible. But something was wrong. The water felt thicker somehow, heavier, like swimming through syrup. I pushed harder, my muscles screaming with the effort, but I didn't seem to be making any progress. The shore looked just as far away as before. Panting, I stopped to tread water and get my bearings. That's when I heard it. A voice carried on the wind, soft but unmistakable. "Join us, swimmer. The water's fine." I spun around, heart pounding. The figure was closer now, maybe 20 yards away. Close enough that I should have been able to make out features, to see who or what it was. But there was nothing to see. Just a dark shape, vaguely human, with no discernible face or form. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. But suddenly, it wasn't alone. To its left and right, more shapes were rising from the waves. Dozens of them. Hundreds. A silent army of featureless shadows, all facing me. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. A hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too much sun. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting to 10, certain that when I opened them, everything would be normal again. 1, 2, 3. The sound of water moving, getting closer. 4, 5, 6. A cold touch on my ankle, like fingers made of seaweed. 7, 8, 9. The voice again, now a chorus of whispers all around me. "Join us, swimmer. Become one with the sea." 10. I opened my eyes. They were everywhere, surrounding me in a perfect circle, their featureless faces all turned towards me. The closest one was barely an arm's length away. I thrashed in the water, trying to find a gap, a way out, but the circle was complete, unbroken. "What are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice small and terrified. The figure directly in front of me tilted its head, an eerily human gesture from something so inhuman. When it spoke, its voice was like the crash of waves on rocks, ancient and powerful. "We are the forgotten, the lost, the ones the sea claimed long ago." Another voice. To my left, sailors and swimmers, explorers and refugees. From behind me, those who went willingly into the depths, and those who fought until their last breath. And then, a cacophony of voices, overlapping, overwhelming. We are loneliness given form. We are the darkness beneath the waves. We are eternal, and we are hungry. I was sobbing now, beyond terror, beyond reason. Please, I begged, though I didn't know what I was begging for. Mercy, understanding, a quick death instead of whatever this was. The original figure reached out a hand. Not a hand, really, but a tendril of darkness shaped like one. "Don't be afraid," it said, almost gently. "Soon, you won't feel anything at all." As its touch neared my face, I found my voice again. I screamed, a primal, desperate sound that tore at my throat. And suddenly, I was moving. Swimming faster than I ever had before, somehow finding a burst of strength I didn't know I possessed. I felt cold hands grabbing at me, trying to pull me back, but I fought through them, kicking and thrashing. I don't know how long I swam. It could have been minutes or hours. All I know is that suddenly, my feet touched sand. I staggered onto the beach, collapsing onto the cool sand, gasping for air. For a long moment, I just lay there, shaking, afraid to look back at the water. When I finally found the courage to lift my head, the ocean was calm, empty, no sign of the figures that had surrounded me. Had it all been a hallucination? A panic attack brought on by swimming too far out at night? I started to laugh, a hysterical edge to it. Of course, that's what it was. There was no army of shadow people in the ocean. I'd just let my imagination run wild, that's all. Still chuckling, I pushed myself to my feet, ready to head home and forget this whole ridiculous episode. That's when I saw it. There, written in the wet sand at the water's edge. "Until next time, swimmer." As I watched, horrified, the waves washed the words away, but I knew what I'd seen. I knew it was real. I ran to my car, drove home well above the speed limit, and locked every door and window in my apartment. I haven't been back to the beach since that night. I can't even look at large bodies of water without breaking into a cold sweat. But sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers. Voices carried on a phantom breeze, promising eternal peace beneath the waves. And I wonder, how long can I resist their call? Because deep down, in a place I don't like to acknowledge, a part of me wants to answer. A part of me wants to wade back into those dark waters and let the sea claim me as its own. After all, they're still out there, waiting, and the water's always fine. Story 9. I used to think the worst thing about my morning commute was the smell. Now, I'd give anything to worry about something as mundane as body odor and stale air. Because what's happening on the Q train? That's the stuff of nightmares. It started about a month ago. I'm Emma, by the way. Graphic designer, cat mom, and until recently, just another face in the morning rush hour crowd. My commute's always been the same. Q train from Prospect Park to 34th Street, Monday to Friday, 8:15 a.m. sharp. That particular Monday seemed normal enough. I swiped my MetroCard, descended into the familiar tire-lined cavern of the subway station, and waited on the platform. The train arrived with its usual screech of metal on metal, and I shuffled on with the rest of the bleary-eyed commuters. I found a seat, miracle of miracles, and settled in for the ride, pulling out my phone to scroll mindlessly through Instagram. That's when I first noticed them. Directly across from me sat a man in a crisp charcoal suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed. Nothing unusual there, except I could have sworn I'd seen him in that exact spot, wearing that exact outfit, yesterday, and the day before. I shook off the feeling. In a city of millions, You're bound to see the same faces now and then, right? But as I glanced around the car, that nagging sense of déjà vu grew stronger. The woman with the red umbrella, even though it wasn't raining. The teenager with the oversized headphones. The elderly couple holding hands. They were all familiar. Too familiar. I tried to focus on my phone, but I could feel their eyes on me. Not staring, exactly. Just aware. Like they were waiting for something. When my stop came, I practically bolted off the train, my heart racing. As the doors closed behind me, I turned back for one last look. They were all watching me now, their faces expressionless. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Lack of sleep, too much coffee, an overactive imagination. That's all it was. But the next day, they were there again. Same people, same seats, same outfits. And the day after that, and the day after that. I started varying my schedule, sometimes leaving earlier, sometimes later. But no matter when I got on the train, they were always there. Always in the same formation, always watching. I tried talking to them once. Walked right up to the man in the charcoal suit and said, "Excuse me, sir, do I know you from somewhere?" He turned to me slowly, his eyes unfocused, like he was looking through me rather than at me. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "Please take your seat, miss. The journey isn't over yet." A chill ran down my spine, and I stumbled back to my usual spot, feeling their eyes on me the whole time. After 2 weeks of this, I was a wreck. I wasn't sleeping, couldn't focus at work. I tried taking a different route, but every train I got on, there they were, waiting. I even went to the police, babbling about stalkers on the subway. The officer looked at me like I was crazy. "Ma'am, are these people threatening you? Have they done anything illegal?" I had to admit they hadn't. How do you explain to someone that the real horror isn't what these people are doing, but what they are? Or rather, what they aren't? Because I'd realized something by this point. In all these weeks, I'd never seen them get on the train, never seen them get off. They were just there, always. It came to a head last Friday. I'd been up all night, poring over internet forums about urban legends and supernatural encounters. Most of it was obvious bullshit, but there was one thread that caught my eye. A story about liminal beings, entities that exist in transitional spaces, like elevators, waiting rooms, and subways. The post claimed these beings fed on human energy, slowly draining the life force of their chosen victims. It sounded insane, but no more insane than what I'd been experiencing. So that morning, running on no sleep and way too much caffeine, I decided to confront them. To demand answers, or at least to prove to myself, once and for all, that I wasn't losing my mind. I got on the train, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. They were all there, in their usual spots. But this time, I didn't take my seat. I stood in the middle of the car and took a deep breath. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" The other passengers, the normal ones, looked at me like I was a lunatic. But them, they didn't react at all. Just kept staring with those empty eyes. "Answer me," I shouted, feeling hysteria bubbling up in my throat. "Why are you doing this?" Slowly, in perfect unison, they all turned their heads to look at me. And then they smiled. Not normal smiles. These were too wide, too many teeth, like a child's drawing of a smile. The man in the charcoal suit spoke, but his lips didn't move. Somehow, I heard his voice in my head. "We are the passengers, Emma. We've always been here. Waiting, watching, feeding. The woman with the red umbrella chimed in, her voice overlapping with his in my mind. "You're special, Emma. You can see us. Really see us. Do you know how rare that is? What do you want from me?" I whispered, feeling tears start to roll down my cheeks. The teenager with the headphones answered, his mental voice sounding ancient despite his youthful appearance. "We want you to join us, Emma. To become one of us. To ride these rails for eternity, feeding on the life force of the unseeing masses." I shook my head, backing away until I hit the door of the subway car. No, I won't. You can't make me." They all laughed then, a sound like metal grinding on metal. The elderly woman spoke next, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Oh, darling, you don't have a choice. You've been one of us for a while now. You just haven't realized it yet." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew. I knew with a sickening certainty what she meant. Because suddenly, I couldn't remember the last time I'd gotten off this train. Couldn't remember going to work, or home, or anywhere else. How long had I been here? Days? Weeks? "Look at your reflection, Emma," the man in the charcoal suit said gently. I turned to the window, and the face that looked back at me wasn't mine. Or rather, it was, but wrong. My eyes were too wide, my smile too fixed. I looked like one of them. "No," I whispered, pressing my hands against the glass. "No, this isn't real. This can't be real." But even as I denied it, I felt the change happening, my body becoming less solid, my thoughts becoming part of a larger consciousness. The consciousness of the passengers. I wanted to scream, to fight it, but I couldn't remember how. All I could do was take my place among them, another silent watcher in this endless journey. As my transformation completed, I felt a new presence enter the car. A young woman, looking frazzled and sleep-deprived. She glanced around nervously, her eyes lingering on each of us for just a moment too long. I knew then that she could see us. Really see us. Just as I had. And as the train lurched forward into the darkness of the tunnel, I found myself smiling that too wide smile. Because the journey was just beginning for her. And we would be watching. Always watching. So the next time you're on the subway and you get that prickly feeling on the back of your neck, the sense that someone's watching you, take a good long look at your fellow passengers. We might be looking back. Story 10. I always thought catfishing was the worst thing that could happen from online dating. Turns out there are much darker things lurking behind those profile pictures. My name's Alex, and until last week, I was your typical millennial, just trying to find love in the digital age. Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, you name it, I've swiped on it. But it was on a newer app, Datanite, where I matched with Jess. Her profile was everything I looked for. Cute smile, love of dogs, and a bio that actually made me laugh out loud. We hit it off immediately, messaging back and forth for days. It felt different from other matures. There was a spark, a connection I couldn't quite explain. After a week of texting, Jess suggested we have a video call. "Let's make sure neither of us is a 60-year-old catfish," she joked. I agreed, maybe a little too eagerly. We set up the call for Friday night. I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing the right shirt and angling my laptop for the most flattering light. At 8 p.m. sharp, I clicked the call button, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. The connection was glitchy at first, the video pixelated and jerky, but then it cleared, and there she was. Jess, just as beautiful as her photos, with warm brown eyes and a smile that made my stomach do backflips. "Hey there, handsome," she said, and her voice was like honey. Can you see me okay? I nodded, grinning like an idiot. Crystal clear. You're even prettier in motion. She laughed, a sound that made me want to tell 1,000 bad jokes just to hear it again. We fell into easy conversation, talking about our jobs, our hobbies, our dreams. It felt so natural, like we'd known each other for years instead of days. But about 20 minutes into the call, something strange happened. The video lagged for a second, and when it caught up, Jess's face looked different. Just for a split second, it was like someone else was staring back at me. Someone older, with sharper features and cold, calculating eyes. I blinked, and Jess was back to normal, mid-sentence about her favorite hiking trail. I shook my head, chalking it up to a glitch in the connection or a trick of the light. But it happened again a few minutes later. Another lag, another glimpse of that other face. This time, I could have sworn I saw a different room behind her, just for an instant. Darker, cluttered, nothing like the cozy bedroom she was supposedly calling from. Alex, you okay? Jess's voice snapped me back to attention. You looked a million miles away for a second there. I forced a laugh, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. Sorry, just got distracted by how beautiful you are, I said, cringing internally at the cheesy line. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. You're sweet. Hey, can I ask you something? Sure, shoot. What's your address? I'd love to send you something. A little surprise. The question caught me off guard. It seemed harmless enough, but combined with those strange glitches, it set off alarm bells in my head. I don't usually give out my address this early, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Maybe after we meet in person. Something flashed across Jess's face. Anger, frustration. But it was gone so quickly, I thought I might have imagined it. Of course, silly me, she said with a laugh. I'm just so excited to get to know you better. The rest of the call passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When we finally said goodnight, promising to set up an in-person date soon, I felt a mix of excitement and unease. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as my mind replayed every moment of the video call. Was I just being paranoid? Or had I seen something I wasn't supposed to? The next morning, I woke up to a text from Jess. Had such a great time last night. Can't wait to see you again. Maybe another video call tonight. I hesitated before responding. Part of me wanted to make up an excuse, to trust my gut and end things before they went any further. But another part, the part that had felt that undeniable connection, wanted to give her another chance. Sounds great, I typed back. Same time. The response was immediate. Perfect. See you then, handsome. All day, I was distracted, alternating between excitement for the call and a growing sense of dread. By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, my palms were sweaty as I clicked the call button. This time, the connection was crystal clear from the start. Jess looked radiant, her smile warm and inviting. Hey you, she said. I've been looking forward to this all day. We fell into conversation again, and for a while, I forgot my fears. She was charming, funny, everything I'd been looking for. Maybe last night's glitches really had just been technical issues. But then, about halfway through the call, it happened again. The video froze for a second, and when it resumed, the person staring back at me wasn't Jess. It was an older man, his eyes cold and calculating, a sinister smile playing at his lips. I jerked back from my screen, my heart pounding. What the hell? The man's smile widened. When he spoke, it was with Jess's voice. Is something wrong, Alex? The video glitched again, and Jess was back, looking concerned. Alex, You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I couldn't speak. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I think there's something wrong with my connection, I managed to stammer out. I keep seeing glitches. Jess tilted her head, her expression sympathetic. Oh no, that's so frustrating. Want to try reconnecting? I nodded, grateful for the chance to catch my breath. The call ended, and I sat there, my hands shaking as I waited for her to call back. When the call came through, I hesitated before answering. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, made me click. Except, the video loaded, and my blood ran cold. The face on my screen wasn't Jess. It wasn't even the older man I'd glimpsed before. It was me, but not me as I was right now. This version of me was older, haggard, with dark circles under wild, frightened eyes. The room behind him, behind me, was dim, cluttered with computer equipment and what looked like surveillance gear. Listen to me, Notmi said, his voice urgent. You don't have much time. They're coming for you. They've been watching you, studying you. The dating app, the messages, the calls. It's all been them. Preparing. Preparing for what? I heard myself ask, my voice barely a whisper. Notmi leaned closer to the camera, his eyes darting nervously off screen. For the switch, they need new bodies, new identities. They've been doing this for years, jumping from person to person. And now they've chosen you. A noise in the background made Notmi whirl around. They're here. Listen, whatever you do, don't the call cut off abruptly, leaving me staring at my own pale, terrified reflection in the black screen. For a long moment, I sat there, frozen. Then, slowly, I reached out and closed my laptop. My hands were steady now, too steady, like they belonged to someone else. I stood up and walked to the mirror hanging on my bedroom wall. The face that looked back at me was mine, but the eyes were all wrong. Cold, calculating, ancient. A smile spread across my face. No, not my face. Not anymore. Oh, Alex, I heard myself say, but the voice wasn't mine. It was older, amused, with the faintest trace of a southern drawl. You should have listened to yourself. I wanted to scream, to fight, to do something, but I was trapped, a passenger in my own body. I could only watch as Notmi picked up my phone, opened the Dat Night app, and started swiping. Now then, Notmi said, let's find our next date, shall we? As my fingers swiped right on a smiling profile picture, I realized the true horror of my situation. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. And somewhere out there, another unsuspecting soul was about to fall into the same trap I had. Another Alex would soon be watching helplessly as their life was stolen away, one video call at a time. So the next time you're chatting with a match online and they suggest a video call, think twice. Because you never know who or what might really be on the other end of that connection. And trust me, some things are better left unconnected. Story 11. They say the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest at 3 a.m. in St. Agnes Hospital. That veil might as well be tissue paper, especially in room 237. I'm Lily Chun, RN night shift nurse at St. Agnes for the past 5 years. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff working the graveyard shift in a small town hospital. Delirious patients, grieving families. The occasional drunk stumbling into the Year A at 2 a.m. thinking it's a Taco Bell. But nothing prepared me for Mrs. Abernathy in room 237. It started 3 weeks ago. Just another Tuesday night. Or Wednesday morning if you want to get technical. I was doing my 3 a.m. rounds, checking on the handful of patients in our geriatric ward. Most were sound asleep, their monitors beeping steadily in the quiet hallway. Then I got to room 237, Mrs. Edna Abernathy, 89 years old, admitted for pneumonia and early-stage dementia. Sweet old lady, usually slept through the night without a peep. But as I approached her door, I heard whispering. Now, patients talking in their sleep isn't unusual, but this was different. It wasn't the mumbled nonsense of a dream. It was clear, purposeful, and it wasn't just Mrs. Abernathy's voice. I paused outside the door, my hand on the knob. The whispering got louder, more urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent a chill down my spine. It sounded like pleading. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The whispering stopped instantly. Mrs. Abernathy was sitting up in bed, her roomy eyes fixed on the far corner of the room. When she saw me, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hello dear," she said, her voice raspy. "Is it time for my medicine?" I checked my watch. 3:07 a.m. "Not for a few hours, Mrs. Abernathy. I just came to check on you. Are you feeling all right?" I thought I heard voices. She tilted her head, confused. "Voices? No, dear. Just little old me in here." I nodded, doing my best to keep my face neutral as I checked her vitals. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I turned to leave, Mrs. Abernathy grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a woman her age. "They only come at night," she whispered, her eyes suddenly clear and focused. "When the moon is high and the world is asleep. They have so much to say, but so little time to say it." I gently removed her hand, trying to keep my voice calm. "Who comes at night, Mrs. Abernathy?" She just smiled that empty smile again and lay back down, closing her eyes. Within seconds, she was snoring softly. I left the room, my heart racing. I told myself it was just the ramblings of a woman with dementia. Nothing to worry about. God, I wish I'd been right. The next night was the same, and the next. Every time I approached room 237 at 3 a.m., I'd hear the whispering, and every time I entered, it would stop. Mrs. Abernathy would be sitting up, staring at that same corner, with that same unsettling smile. By the fourth night, I was a wreck. I hadn't been sleeping well, jumping at every shadow in my apartment. I'd even asked to switch shifts, but we were short-staffed, as usual. So there I was, walking down that quiet hallway at 3 a.m., my footsteps echoing off the linoleum floors. As I neared room 237, the whispering started, but this time it was louder, clearer, and I could have sworn I heard my name. I stood outside the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. The voices were clearer now, a chorus of whispers, all talking over each other. "She's here, finally. Tell her, warn her." I pushed the door open. Mrs. Abernathy was sitting up as usual, but this time, she wasn't alone. The room was filled with shapes, hazy, translucent figures crowded around her bed, all turned to look at me as I entered. I could see right through them to the machines and monitors behind. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Mrs. Abernathy smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "There you are, dear," she said, her voice oddly cheerful. "We've been waiting for you. They have so much to tell you." The shapes moved towards me, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. I backed away, my back hitting the closed door. When had it closed? What are they?" I managed to stammer out. Mrs. Abernathy laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Why, they're the ones who've passed on, of course. This hospital has seen so many deaths over the years, so many unfinished stories. They gather here, in this room, waiting for someone who can hear them. Someone like me, and now, someone like you. The shapes pressed closer. I could almost make out faces now. Old, young, men, women, even children, all with the same desperate look in their eyes. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Why me? One of the shapes moved forward. As it got closer, its features became clearer. It was a young man, maybe in his early 20s, with a nasty gash across his forehead. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Because you're on the edge, Lily. Not quite with us, not quite with them. You can bridge the gap. Another figure pushed forward, an elderly woman with a kind face. We need your help, dear. So many of us left with unfinished business. Things left unsaid, wrongs left unrighted. Tell my wife I love her, one voice called out. Find my killer, said another. Save my child, pleaded a third. Their voices overlapped, growing louder and more insistent. I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. Stop, please, just stop. Suddenly, everything went quiet. I opened my eyes to find Mrs. Abernathy standing right in front of me. For a frail old woman, she'd moved with impossible speed and silence. I know it's overwhelming, dear, she said, her voice gentle. But you have a gift, a responsibility. These souls need your help to move on, to find peace. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I can't. I'm just a nurse. I'm not special. Mrs. Abernathy took my hand in her gnarled one. Her skin felt like ice. Oh, but you are. You've always known you were different, haven't you? The way you could sometimes tell what a patient needed before they asked. The way you could sense when someone was about to go. She was right. I'd always had a knack for anticipating my patient's needs. And more than once, I'd had a sudden, overwhelming urge to check on a patient, only to find them coding when I entered the room. What? What do I need to do? I heard myself ask, my voice shaky. Mrs. Abernathy smiled, and for a moment, she looked younger, more vibrant. Just listen, dear. Listen and help where you can. It won't be easy, but it's important work. The most important work there is. She turned back to her bed, the ghostly figures parting to let her through. As she settled back against her pillows, she fixed me with a piercing gaze. Oh, and Lily, you might want to check on Mr. Jensen Ron 242. He doesn't have much time left, and he has a message for his daughter. I nodded numbly, my hand finding the doorknob behind me. As I opened the door, I heard Mrs. Abernathy's voice one last time. See you tomorrow night, dear. We have so much to talk about. I practically ran down the hallway to room 2424. Mr. Johnson, a terminal cancer patient, was awake and agitated. Nurse, he gasped as I entered. I need to tell Sarah. I took his hand, feeling the weakness in his grip. It's okay, Mr. Johnson. I'm here. What do you need to tell Sarah? As he spoke, his voice growing fainter with each word, I felt a presence behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know that the room was filling with those ghostly figures, waiting to welcome another soul to their ranks. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, every night has been the same. At 3 a.m., I go to room 237. I listen to the whispers, write down messages, make promises to the dead. Some nights are easier than others. Some nights I leave that room shaking, with knowledge no living person should have. But I can't stop, won't stop, because Mrs. Abernathy was right. This is important work, and as terrifying as it is, as much as it's changed my life, I know I'm making a difference. Bridging the gap between the living and the dead, one night shift at a time. So if you ever find yourself in St. Agnes Hospital in the dead of night, and you hear whispers coming from room 237, don't be afraid. It's just me and Mrs. Abernathy helping lost souls find their way home. But maybe don't come in. Some conversations are meant to stay private, even after death. Story 12. I came to the cabin to write my novel. Instead, I think I'm writing my own obituary. My name's David Chun, and up until 2 weeks ago, I was your typical struggling writer. 3 unpublished novels gathering dust in my desk drawer, a day job I hated, and a burning desire to create something that would finally put my name on the literary map. That's when I saw the ad Secluded Writers Retreat in the heart of the Adirondacks. Inspire your muse in the bosom of nature. No Wi-Fi, no distractions, just you and your craft. It sounded perfect. I'd always dreamed of doing the whole cabin in the woods thing, like Thoreau or Hemingway. So I drained my meager savings account, told my boss to shove it, and headed for the mountains. The cabin was everything I'd hoped for. Rustic but comfortable, with a big stone fireplace, a desk facing a picture window with a view of endless pines, and blessed silence. No traffic, no neighbors, no notifications pinging every 5 seconds. Just me, my laptop, and the great outdoors. The first few days were bliss. I'd wake up with the sun, make a pot of coffee strong enough to grow hair on a billiard ball, and write until my fingers cramped. The words flowed like they never had before. It was like the forest itself was whispering the story to me. Looking back, I should have realized that was the first red flag. It was on the 4th night that things started to get weird. I'd fallen asleep at my desk, face mashed against the keyboard. When I woke up, groggy and disoriented, I saw that I'd apparently been sleep typing. The document on my screen was full of text I didn't remember writing. It wasn't nonsense either. It was good. Really good. Better than anything I'd written while conscious. I scrolled through it, my excitement growing. This was it. The breakthrough I'd been waiting for. My subconscious had finally decided to play ball. But as I read further, the content started to change. The story, which had started as a pretty standard mystery novel, took a dark turn. The protagonist, a character clearly based on me, found himself trapped in a cabin, hunted by something ancient and malevolent that lived in the woods. The descriptions were vivid, terrifying. I could almost smell the rot on the creature's breath, feel its claws scratching at the cabin door. I shook my head, laughing nervously. Guess I've got a darker imagination than I thought, I muttered, closing the laptop. I decided to take a break, clear my head with a walk in the woods. Big mistake. As I hiked along the overgrown trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me jump. I told myself it was just my overactive writer's brain, inspired by that creepy sleep-written passage. But then I saw the claw marks. Deep gouges in the trunk of an ancient pine, far too high and too large to have been made by any normal forest creature. They looked fresh, the sap still oozing. I ran back to the cabin, my heart pounding. As soon as I was inside, I locked the door and drew all the curtains. I was being ridiculous, I knew. There was a perfectly logical explanation. Bears, maybe, or vandals. But deep down, I knew. Those claw marks looked exactly like the ones I'd described in my sleep-written story. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old cabin, Every whisper of wind through the trees had me sitting bolt upright, straining my ears for any sign of what? I didn't know. And that was the scariest part. When dawn finally broke, I practically ran to my laptop. I needed to see if I'd written anything else in my sleep. I hadn't. But the document was different. The story had continued, but not in any way I could have written it. The text was in an alphabet I'd never seen before, all strange angles and curves that hurt my eyes to look at. But somehow, I could still understand it. It described, in nauseating detail, the creature that lived in the woods. How it had been there since before humans walked the earth. How it fed on creativity, on imagination. How it lured writers and artists to this forsaken place, trapping them, feeding on their ideas until there was nothing left but an empty husk. And how I was its next meal. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I was hallucinating, or having some kind of mental breakdown. That had to be it. I spent the rest of the day huddled in the cabin, jumping at every sound. I tried to write, to distract myself, but the words wouldn't come. It was like my creativity had been drained away, leaving nothing but a yawning emptiness and gnawing fear. As night fell, the shadows seemed to grow longer, darker. They crept across the floor like grasping fingers, reaching for me. I huddled in the corner, a kitchen knife clutched in my trembling hands. That's when I heard it. A scratching at the door. Soft at first, then louder, more insistent. "Go away," I whispered, my voice hoarse with terror. "You're not real. This isn't real." A low chuckle emanated from behind the door, a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a voice that sounded ancient, like rustling leaves and crumbling stone. "Oh, but I am real, David," it said, my name sounding obscene in its mouth. "As real as the stories you write. As real as your fears. As real as your delicious, delicious imagination." I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears. This wasn't happening. It was a dream, a hallucination. I'd wake up any second. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a new sound. The clack of keys on a keyboard. My eyes flew open. There, at my desk, sat something, a shape that hurt to look at directly, all twisted limbs and too many angles. It was typing on my laptop, its long, spindly fingers flying over the keys. As I watched, frozen in horror, words appeared on the screen. My words, the continuation of my novel, but twisted, darker. I could feel my ideas, my creativity, being sucked out of my mind and onto the page. The creature turned to me, and though it had no face that I could discern, I felt it smile. "Your story is almost complete, David," it said, its voice like dry leaves scraping against bark. "Just a few more chapters, and you'll be finished." I wanted to run, to fight, to do something, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could only watch as it turned back to the laptop and continued to type. With each word that appeared on the screen, I felt a piece of myself slip away. My memories, my dreams, my very essence, all being poured onto the page. I realized with dawning horror that this was how it fed. Not on flesh and blood, but on imagination, on creativity, on souls. As my consciousness began to fade, one last, desperate thought flashed through my mind. I focused all my remaining will, all my creativity, on one final act of defiance. I changed the ending. In my mind, I rewrote the story, not as a horror, but as a triumph. A tale of a writer who faced the darkness and emerged victorious, who turned the tables on the ancient evil and banished it back to the shadows. The creature paused in its typing, sensing the change. It turned to me, its non-face a mask of confusion and growing fear. "What are you doing?" it hissed. "This isn't how the story goes." But it was too late. The words were already appearing on the screen, faster than the creature could erase them. My words, my story. As the final sentence took shape, the creature let out a howl that shook the very foundations of the cabin. It began to dissolve, its impossible form breaking apart like mist in the morning sun. "This isn't the end," it shrieked as it faded away. Stories never truly end. And then it was gone. The cabin was silent once more, save for the gentle hum of my laptop. I don't know how long I sat there, trembling, before I finally found the strength to stand. On shaky legs, I made my way to the desk and looked at the screen. There, in black and white, was my novel, completed, different from anything I could have imagined, yet undeniably mine. A story of terror and triumph, of ancient evils and the power of human creativity. I packed my bags that night and left the cabin at first light. I've been back in the city for a week now, trying to make sense of what happened, trying to convince myself it was all just a vivid dream or a stress-induced hallucination. But then I look at my novel, at the words that came from some place deeper and darker than I knew existed within me, and I know the truth. The creature was right about one thing: stories never truly end. And I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in a dark and lonely place, it's already writing the sequel. So if you're a writer looking for inspiration, and you see an ad for a secluded cabin in the woods, take my advice. Stick to coffee shops. Some muses are better left uninvoked. Story 13. I've driven across this country more times than I can count, but I've never been so lost as I am right now. And I'm starting to think that getting lost might be the least of my problems. My name's Mike, and I'm, or I guess I was, a long-haul trucker. 18 years on the road, and I thought I'd seen it all. Lot lizards, highway bandits, even a tornado once down in Oklahoma. But what happened at that rest stop on I-80? That's something else entirely. It was about 2 a.m. when I pulled into the rest area, middle of nowhere, Nebraska. The kind of place where the darkness feels alive, pressing in on all sides. My eyes were gritty with fatigue, and I figured a quick power nap would do me good before finishing the haul to Denver. The lot was empty, except for a beat-up RV that had clearly seen better days. As I maneuvered my rig into a spot, I noticed something odd about the place. The lights in the parking lot seemed off, too dim in some spots, blazing bright in others. And they were flickering, not all at once, but in a weird, rolling pattern that made my eyes hurt. I shook it off. Faulty wiring, I told myself. Lord knows these old rest stops don't get the maintenance they need. I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on gravel that seemed sharper, more angular than it should be. The air smelled wrong, too. Not the usual mix of diesel and fast food that you get at these places, but something metallic and vaguely sweet, like blood and cotton candy. As I walked towards the restroom building, that feeling of wrongness grew stronger. The concrete path felt spongy under my feet. And was it just my tired eyes? Or were the cracks in the sidewalk moving, shifting like snakes when I wasn't looking directly at them? I reached for the restroom door, and that's when I realized the first truly impossible thing. The handle was at chest height. Now, I'm not a tall man by any means, but I'm not a dwarf either. This handle should have been at my hip, not my sternum. What the hell? I muttered, reaching out tentatively. The metal was warm to the touch, almost feverishly so. And as my fingers closed around it, I could have sworn I felt it pulse. I yanked my hand back, my heart suddenly racing. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I needed to get back to my truck, to get the hell out of here. But as I turned, I realized the parking lot had changed. My truck was gone. In its place was an old Studebaker, chrome gleaming unnaturally bright in the flickering lights. And it wasn't alone. The lot was now full of vehicles, but not a semi or modern car among them. Classic cars, vintage motorcycles, even a horse-drawn carriage. All of them empty, all of them looking like they'd just rolled off a showroom floor, despite some being clearly over a century old. "Okay, Mike," I said aloud, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "You're dreaming. Fell asleep at the wheel and this is just some crazy nightmare. Time to wake up." I pinched myself hard, drawing blood. The pain was sharp, real. This was no dream. A sound caught my attention, a low, rhythmic thumping coming from inside the restroom. It sounded almost like a heartbeat. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I turned back to the door. The handle was even higher now, nearly at eye level. The door itself seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting in time with that thumping sound. I reached for the handle again, some morbid curiosity overriding my fear. As my fingers touched the metal, the thumping stopped. For a moment, everything was deathly still. Then the door burst open, nearly knocking me off my feet. But it wasn't a restroom on the other side. It was a vast, cavernous space, stretching far beyond what should have been possible in a small highway rest stop. And it was full of people. No, not people. Things that looked almost human, but wrong in subtle, nightmarish ways. They turned to look at me, hundreds of eyes reflecting the sickly fluorescent light. Some had too many eyes. Some had none at all. Their bodies were twisted, elongated, compressed in ways that defied anatomy and physics. And they were all smiling. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. I turned to run, only to find more of them behind me. They had emerged from the impossible vehicles, silent as shadows. "Welcome, traveler," one of them said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "We've been waiting for you." "Who? What are you?" I managed to choke out. The thing's smile widened, literally stretching from ear to ear. "We are the forgotten, the lost, those who took a wrong turn on life's highway and found something else. Another creature, this one tall and spindly with skin like tarnished silver, stepped forward. You took a wrong turn to Mike. Or perhaps the right one. Depends on your perspective." My mind reeled. How did it know my name? "This isn't real," I said, more to myself than to them. "This can't be real." They all laughed then, a sound like rusted gears grinding together. "Oh, it's real," the first one said. "More real than the world you left behind. That world is the illusion, Mike. A thin veneer of order over the chaos that truly rules existence. Here, we embrace the chaos. We revel in it." As if to demonstrate, the creature's form began to shift and twist, its features melting and reforming like wax under a flame. The others followed suit, their bodies undulating and changing in a dizzying display of impossible transformations. I felt my sanity starting to slip, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. I closed my eyes, pressing my palms against them until I saw starbursts. "This isn't happening," I muttered. "This isn't happening." A cold hand on my shoulder made me jump. I opened my eyes to find myself face to face with Me, or something wearing my face, at least. But the eyes were all wrong. Swirling vortexes of color where there should have been irises and pupils. "It's happening, Mike," my doppelganger said. Its voice an unsettling mix of my own and something older, deeper. "And you have a choice to make. Join us, embrace the truth of existence. Or," it gestured behind me. I turned to see a door that hadn't been there before. Plain, unassuming. A sign above it read, "Exit," in faded red letters. "You can leave," my double continued. "Go back to your orderly, predictable world. Your long, lonely drives across a country that's nothing but an illusion. Your empty life, ticking away 1 mile at a time." I looked back and forth between the creatures and the door, my mind racing. This was insanity. Literally, clinically insane. And yet a small part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, was fascinated. Thrilled, even. In all my years on the road, I'd never experienced anything like this. Never felt so. Alive. The silvered creature stepped closer, its form rippling like mercury. "Time to decide, Mike. The door won't stay open forever." I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. This was crazy. I needed to leave, to get back to my normal life. To sanity, didn't I? With an effort that felt like tearing myself in half, I turned away from the creatures and walked to the door. As my hand closed around the knob, I heard my doppelganger speak one last time. "See you down the road. Mike, we'll leave a light on for you." I yanked the door open and stepped through. I found myself back in the parking lot. My truck was there, right where I'd left it. The lot was empty again, save for that old RV. Everything looked normal, almost normal. Because now that I knew what to look for, I could see the cracks in reality. The way the shadows moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. The faint, rhythmic pulsing of the ground beneath my feet. The whispers just at the edge of hearing. I climbed into my truck, my hands shaking as I turned the key. As I pulled out of the rest stop, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For just a second, I saw them all standing there, waving goodbye. My double winked at me, its smile promising secrets yet to be revealed. I've been driving for 3 days straight now. I don't know where I'm going, only that I can't stop. Because every time I think about pulling over, I see that rest stop in my mind. And I'm not sure if I'm running away from it, or back to it. So if you're ever driving down I-80 in the dead of night, and you see a rest stop that wasn't there before, keep driving. Don't stop, no matter how tired you are. Because some rest stops aren't meant for rest. And some journeys don't have a destination. Story 14. I always thought the scariest thing about jogging at night was the risk of twisted ankles or creepy guys in vans. Turns out, there are far worse things lurking in the shadows of suburban streets. Things that hunt in the dark and feed on fear. My name's Jess, and up until 2 weeks ago, I was your typical, overworked, overstressed millennial trying to squeeze a workout into my insane schedule. Late night runs became my thing. The only time I could clear my head and feel like I was actually living instead of just existing. Ridgewood, my little slice of suburban paradise, always felt safe. You know the type: manicured lawns, neighborhood watch signs, the kind of place where people still leave their doors unlocked. So when I laced up my running shoes at 11 p.m. that Tuesday night, the only thing on my mind was hitting my 5,000 goal. The night was perfect for a run. Cool but not cold. A light breeze carrying the scent of someone's late-night barbecue. My feet hit the pavement in a steady rhythm, my breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Streetlights cast pools of warm yellow light, islands in the sea of darkness between houses. I was about a mile in when I first felt it. That prickle on the back of your neck, the one that tells you you're being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see some neighbor walking their dog. Nothing, just empty sidewalks and silent houses. I picked up my pace a little, chalking it up to an overactive imagination fueled by too many true crime podcasts. But the feeling persisted. With every step, it grew stronger. I wasn't just being watched, I was being followed. Another glance back. Still nothing. But this time, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move, just at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look directly at it, it was gone. My heart was pounding now, and not just from the exertion. I told myself I was being ridiculous. This was Ridgewood, for crying out loud. Nothing bad ever happened here. I turned onto Maple Street, picking up the pace again. Just another mile and I'd be home. Safe. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not my own, but a second set, slightly out of sync with mine. They were behind me, matching my increased speed. I broke into a sprint, fear giving me wings. The footsteps sped up too, getting closer. I could hear breathing now, harsh and ragged, right behind me. I risked another look back and immediately wished I hadn't. There was something there. A dark shape, more shadow than substance, moving with an unnatural, gliding gait. It had no defined features, just a vaguely humanoid form that seemed to absorb the light around it. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat and echoing off the silent houses. Surely someone would hear, would come to help. But the streets remained empty, the houses dark. It was like the whole world had gone to sleep, leaving me alone with this thing. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. But no matter how fast I went, those footsteps stayed right behind me. That ragged breathing getting closer, closer. I turned onto my street, my house in sight. Just a little further, I fumbled for my keys, nearly dropping them in my panic. That's when the streetlight above me went out. I skidded to a stop, momentarily blind in the sudden darkness. My chest heaved as I spun around, trying to spot my pursuer. Nothing. The street was empty. The only sound was my own frantic breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. For a moment, I let myself believe it was over, that whatever had been chasing me was gone. Then, one by one, the streetlights behind me began to go out. A wave of darkness sweeping towards me, as if something was extinguishing them as it passed. I ran, keys clutched in my shaking hand. I sprinted for my front door. I could feel the darkness nipping at my heels, hear that ragged breathing getting closer. I slammed into my door, jabbing the key at the lock with trembling fingers. Come on, I muttered, panic making me clumsy. The key slid home. I twisted, heard the blessed sound of the lock clicking open. I threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me and engaging every lock. For a long moment, I just stood there, back pressed against the door, waiting, listening, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no breathing. Just the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the sound of my own ragged gasps. Slowly, my heart rate began to return to normal. I laughed, a shaky, hysterical sound. What the hell had just happened? Had I imagined the whole thing? I moved to my living room window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek out. The street was normal again, streetlights casting their warm glow on empty sidewalks. No sign of any shadowy pursuers. Get it together, Jess, I muttered to myself. You're losing it. I decided a hot shower was in order. something to wash away the sweat and the lingering tendrils of fear. As the water pounded on my back, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Stress-induced hallucination, maybe. Or just an overactive imagination combined with too much caffeine and not enough sleep. By the time I got out, wrapped in my fluffiest robe, I'd almost convinced myself it was all in my head. Almost. Because as I wiped the steam from the mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on the back of my neck, was a mark. 5 long, thin bruises, like fingers, as if something had tried to grab me. I stumbled out of the bathroom, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. That's when I noticed the blinking light on my answering machine. With a trembling finger, I pressed play. "Hey Jess, it's Mum. I know it's late, but I just had the strangest feeling, like you were in danger. Call me back when you get this, okay? I need to know you're alright." Exactly when I'd been running for my life, I sank onto my couch, my legs suddenly unable to support me. It had been real, all of it, which meant a sound from outside made me jump. I approached the window cautiously, peering out into the night. The streetlights were out again, all of them. The entire street was plunged into an unnatural darkness. And there, right at the edge of my property, was a figure. A shadow darker than the night around it, vaguely human-shaped, but wrong in ways I couldn't quite define. It was looking right at me. I couldn't see eyes, but I could feel its gaze, cold and hungry. Slowly, deliberately, it raised a hand and waved. A gesture that was almost friendly, if it wasn't so terrifying. I stumbled away from the window, my heart pounding. What did it want? Why me? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "See you tomorrow night, Jess. Same time, same place." The chase is on. I haven't left my house in 2 weeks. I've called in sick to work, had groceries delivered, kept all my curtains drawn, but I know I can't hide forever. Because every night, at exactly 11 p.m., the streetlights go out. And every night, I get a new text. "Ready to run. The streets are lonely without you. Don't you want to know what happens if I catch you? I don't know what this thing is, or why it's fixated on me, but I know I can't keep hiding. Sooner or later, I'll have to face it, to run again. And deep down, in a place I don't like to acknowledge, a part of me is looking forward to it. Because for those terrifying minutes when I was running for my life, I felt more alive than I ever have before. So tonight, I'm lacing up my running shoes. I'm going to step out into the darkness and face whatever's waiting for me. Because sometimes, the only way to overcome your fears is to run straight at them. But if you're ever out late at night and you see a woman running like her life depends on it, don't try to help. Don't even slow down. Because the thing chasing her, it might decide you look like more interesting prey. After all, the night is dark and full of terrors, and some of them are always hungry for a good chase. Story 15. I thought I'd hit the jackpot with this gig. 2 weeks in a mansion, paid to lounge by the pool and keep the plants alive. Turns out, some jobs are too good to be true, and some houses don't like strangers. My name's Zoe, and I'm more, I guess, a wooze. Typical broke college student. When my roommate told me about this house-sitting opportunity, I jumped at it. The Montgomerys were some big-shot finance couple, jetting off to the Maldives for their anniversary. All I had to do was keep their place in order and make sure their prissy Siamese cat didn't starve. Easy money, right? The house was everything I'd imagined and more. 3 stories of sleek modern architecture nestled in the hills overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen bigger than my entire apartment, and a backyard that belonged in a magazine spread. Mr. Montgomery gave me a whirlwind tour, rattling off instructions about the alarm system, the cat's feeding schedule, and which plants needed watering. His wife breezed through, all Chanel perfume and air kisses, barely sparing me a glance. "Oh, and Zoe," Mr. Montgomery said as they were leaving, "the East Wing is off limits. Renovations, you understand. No need to go poking around there." I nodded, trying not to roll my eyes. Rich people and their secrets. As their Tesla purred down the driveway, I did a little happy dance in the foyer. 2 weeks of luxury, all to myself. If only I'd known. The first couple of days were bliss. I lounged by the pool, raided the well-stocked fridge, and binge-watched shows on their massive TV. The cat, Duchess, mostly ignored me, which suited me just fine. It was on the 3rd night that things started to get weird. I was in the kitchen, heating up some leftover Thai food, when I heard it. A door slamming, somewhere deep in the house. I froze, my hand hovering over the microwave button. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. No response. I told myself it was just the wind or the house settling. But as I made my way back to the living room, a chill ran down my spine. All the doors I'd left open were now closed. I shook it off. Old houses do strange things, right? Even if this one was barely 5 years old. But the next morning, things got weirder. I woke up to find all the faucets in the house running full blast. The TV in the living room was on, blaring static at top volume. And Duchess was nowhere to be found. I spent an hour searching for that damn cat, calling her name and shaking her treat bag. When I finally found her, she was huddled in the back of a closet, her eyes wide and frightened. "What's got you so spooked, girl?" I asked, reaching out to pet her. She hissed and swiped at me, leaving 3 long scratches on my arm. As I was bandaging my arm in the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. A shadow moving behind me. I whirled around, but the hallway was empty. My heart was pounding now. This wasn't just weird coincidences anymore. Something was happening in this house. Something not right. I tried calling the Montgomerys, but it went straight to voicemail. Probably living it up on some beach, oblivious to the freaky stuff going down in their home. That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every distant thump had me sitting bolt upright, straining my ears. And always, that feeling of being watched. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a scream. It took me a second to realize it was my own. The bedroom was freezing, my breath coming out in visible puffs, despite it being the middle of summer. And there, at the foot of my bed, was a figure. Shadowy, indistinct, but undeniably there. I scrambled back against the headboard, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. "What do you want?" The figure didn't speak. It just pointed towards the East Wing, and then it was gone, like smoke dissipating in the wind. I didn't sleep again that night. As soon as the sun came up, I was out of that room, pacing the kitchen with a death grip on a mug of coffee. I needed to leave, to call the Montgomerys and tell them to find someone else to watch their haunted house. But as I reached for my phone, I hesitated. They'd never believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself. And if I bailed on this job, I could kiss any future house-sitting gigs goodbye. Plus, a small part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, was curious. What was in the East Wing? What was this house trying to show me? Before I could talk myself out of it, I was walking towards the off-limits section of the house. The hallway leading to it was noticeably cooler, the air heavy with the scent of dust and disuse. The door to the east wing was locked, but I found a key taped to the underside of a nearby console table. Convenient, or planned. As I turned the key in the lock, I could have sworn I heard a sigh, like the house was relieved. The east wing was not what I expected. No renovations, no construction materials, just a long hallway lined with doors. Old doors, nothing like the sleek modern ones in the rest of the house. These looked antique, heavy wood with tarnished brass knobs. I tried the first door, locked. So was the second and the third. But the fourth, it swung open with a crick that set my teeth on edge. Inside was a room that had no business being in this house. It looked like something out of a Victorian manor, heavy velvet drapes, ornate furniture covered in dusty sheets, and everywhere, mirrors. Dozens of them, covering nearly every inch of wall space. As I stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, tugging at the knob, but it wouldn't budge. "Okay, very funny," I called out, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "You got me. I shouldn't be in here. Let me out and I'll forget this ever happened." That's when I saw it. In the mirror directly across from me, my reflection changed. For a split second, I wasn't me anymore. I was an old woman, her face gaunt and terrified, pounding on the glass. I stumbled back with a yelp, knocking into a covered piece of furniture. The sheet slipped off, revealing an ancient television set. It flickered to life, showing grainy black and white footage of this room, but not empty like it was now. It was full of people, all desperately trying to break the mirrors to escape. The noise behind me made me turn. All the mirrors were coming to life now, each one showing a different scene. People trapped, screaming silently, their faces contorted in terror. And in every reflection, in the background, I could see myself, watching, horrified. Realization dawned, cold and sickening. These weren't just mirrors. They were windows, prisons. A hand slammed against the inside of the nearest mirror, making me jump. An old man, his eyes wild with fear and hope, mouthed to words I could somehow understand. "Help us." The room started to spin. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. I sank to my knees, my mind reeling. What was this place? What had the Montgomerys done? As if in answer, I heard a voice. Mr. Montgomery's voice, coming from the TV. "I see you found our little secret. Zoe Sheen. We had such high hopes for you. But I suppose you'll make a fine addition to our collection. After all, the house must be fed." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I felt myself being pulled, stretched, the world twisting around me. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was my own reflection, pounding against the glass, my mouth open in a silent scream. I don't know how long I've been here. Time works differently on this side of the mirror. I've watched the Montgomerys bring in other house sitters, watched them discover the room, watched them join us one by one. But you're different. I can tell. You can see us, really see us, which means you have a chance. So listen carefully. When they offer you the job, say no. When they insist, run. And whatever you do, don't go into the East Wing. Because once you do, once you look into these mirrors, you'll never look out again. And the house will never go hungry. Story 16. I've given over 5,000 rides as a Lyft driver, but I'll never forget the passenger who got in my car that rainy Tuesday night. Some fares you pick up, others pick you. It was close to midnight, and I was thinking about calling it quits. The streets of Seattle were slick with rain, the kind of drizzle that never seems to stop but never quite turns into a real downpour either. My windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically, adding to the drowsy atmosphere. That's when the ping came through. A long ride out to the boonies. Normally, I'd declined too far, too late. But the surge pricing made my eyes widen. This could cover my rent for the month. I accepted and pulled up to the address, a nondescript apartment building on the edge of Capitol Hill. As I idled at the curb, a figure emerged from the shadows of the entryway. Tall, thin, wrapped in a long dark coat despite the mild spring weather. The back door opened and I got a whiff of something odd. Not body odor or booze, the usual late-night passenger scents. This was earthier, like wet leaves and iron. "Evening," I said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Heading out to Snoqualmie, right?" The passenger nodded, their face hidden by the high collar of their coat and the brim of an old-fashioned fedora. "That's right," they said, their voice a low rasp that could have belonged to any gender. "Long drive on a night like this. Hope you don't mind a little conversation to pass the time." I shrugged, pulling away from the curb. "Sure, why not? Keeps me awake." As we merged onto the highway, the city lights fading behind us, the passenger spoke again. "Tell me, driver, do you believe in fate?" I chuckled nervously. "Great, one of those fares. Can't say I've given it much thought. I'm more of a make-your-own-luck kind of guy." "Interesting," they mused. "And what about second chances? Do you think everyone deserves one?" I frowned, glancing in the rearview mirror. All I could see was the brim of that hat. I guess it depends on what they did, right? I mean, everyone makes mistakes, but some things you can't come back from. The passenger leaned forward slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a smile in the shadows of their face. It was too wide, somehow. Too many teeth. "Oh, I think you'd be surprised what one can come back from," they said, their voice dropping to a whisper. "With the right motivation." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the AC. I focused on the road ahead, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. The rain was coming down harder now, sheets of water distorting the world outside the windshield. "So," I said, desperate to steer the conversation to safer waters, "what takes you out to Snoqualmie this late?" A low chuckle from the back seat. "Let's just say I have some unfinished business to attend to." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The GPS chirped, instructing me to take the next exit. As I merged onto the off-ramp, I realized something that made my blood run cold. We were the only car on the road. Had been for miles. "Awful quiet out here," the passenger remarked, as if reading my thoughts. "Almost like the world's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Don't you think?" I grunted non-committally, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. We were on a two-lane road now, dense forest pressing in on both sides. The trees seemed to loom over us, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. "You know," the passenger continued, their voice taking on a dreamy quality, "I used to drive these roads all the time. Years ago, before the incident, I didn't want to ask. Every instinct was screaming at me to keep my mouth shut, to just drive and get this over with. But some morbid curiosity made me speak. Incident." That too wide smile again, visible for just a moment in the rearview mirror. "Oh yes. Quite the tragedy, really. A dark night, much like this one. A lonely road. A driver, not paying quite enough attention. and a girl in the wrong place at the wrong time. My heart was pounding now, blood rushing in my ears. What? What happened? The passenger leaned forward, their breath hot on the back of my neck. Why don't you tell me, Michael? After all, you were there. I slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing on the wet road before coming to a stop. I spun around in my seat, ready to demand answers, to throw this creep out of my car. But the back seat was empty. For a long moment, I just sat there, my breath coming in short gasps. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I more tired than I thought? A tap on my window made me jump. I turned to see the passenger standing outside, rain somehow not touching their coat or hat. Now, Michael, they said, their voice clear despite the closed window. Don't tell me you've forgotten. It was only 5 years ago. Surely the guilt hasn't faded that quickly. And suddenly, I remembered. A flash of headlights, a scream cut short, the sickening thud, the panic, the decision to drive away, to pretend it never happened. No, I whispered, shaking my head. No, this isn't real. You're not real. The passenger's smile widened impossibly, their face splitting open to reveal rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth. Oh, I'm very real, Michael. And I'm here to collect on that second chance you didn't think I deserved. I fumbled for the lock, but my fingers felt numb, clumsy. The passenger's hand, impossibly long and thin, phased through the window like it was made of smoke. Cold fingers wrapped around my throat. You left me there, Michael, they hissed, their voice now a chorus of whispers. Broken and alone. But I didn't die. Oh no. I became something else. Something hungry. And now, I'm going to show you exactly what that feels like. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The world started to fade around the edges, darkness creeping in. The last thing I saw was that terrible smile, growing wider and wider until it filled my entire vision. I woke up. Somewhere else. A dark, cramped space that smelled of earth and decay. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with horror where I was. A coffin. My coffin. But I wasn't dead. I could feel my heart beating, my lungs struggling for air in the confined space. I pounded on the lid, screaming for help, but my voice sounded muffled, distant. That's when I heard it. The ping of a ride request. Somehow, impossibly, I was back in my car. But not as the driver, as the passenger. I watched, helpless, as my body accepted the ride. As my hands turned the key in the ignition. As my mouth smiled that too wide smile at the unsuspecting driver in the front seat. Long drive on a night like this, I heard myself say. But it wasn't my voice. It was that raspy whisper from before. Hope you don't mind a little conversation to pass the time. I tried to warn the driver, to scream, to do anything. But I was trapped, a prisoner in my own body, forced to watch as the cycle began anew. As we pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. For just a moment, I saw my true face, pale, rotting, eyes wide with eternal terror. And I understood. This was my punishment, my penance, doomed to relive that fatal night over and over. Always the passenger, never the driver. Always the victim, never the perpetrator. So the next time you accept a long late-night ride to some remote location, pay attention to your passenger. Really look at them. Because if you see a tall figure in a dark coat and fedora, if you catch a whiff of wet leaves and iron, if their smile seems just a little too wide, well, maybe it's time to pull over and end the ride. Before the ride ends, you After all, not everyone deserves a second chance, and some fares are better left unpicked. Story 17. The Ferris wheel shouldn't be turning at 3 a.m. But here I am, watching it spin in the moonlight, empty seats swaying gently in the breeze. And I'm starting to think that closed for the season might mean something very different at Willow Grove Amusement Park. My name's Jake, and I've been the night watchman at Willow Grove for about 3 months now. Easy gig, or so I thought. Walk the grounds, make sure no teenagers are sneaking in for after-hours makeout sessions. Keep an eye out for vandals. Nothing to it. Right. Wrong. So wrong. It started small. A balloon floating by when there was no wind. The distant tinkling of carousel music, too faint to be sure I'd really heard it. The kind of stuff you can write off as imagination playing tricks in the dark. But then came the night of the Ferris wheel. I was doing my usual rounds, flashlight beams sweeping across empty concession stands and shuttered game booths. The park always looks a little creepy after dark, all shadowy shapes and looming silhouettes. But that night, it felt different. The air was heavy, charged, like right before a thunderstorm. As I rounded the corner by the tilt-a-whirl, I heard it. A low, mechanical groan, followed by the unmistakable creak of metal under strain. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding. That sound shouldn't be possible. All the rides were powered down, their control booths locked up tight. I turned, slowly, towards the center of the park, and there it was. The Ferris wheel, all 160 feet of it, turning lazily in the moonlight. No lights, no music, just the slow, inexorable rotation of that massive wheel. What the hell? I muttered, my voice sounding thin and scared in the night air. I approached cautiously, my flashlight beam dancing erratically as my hand shook. Up close, I could see that the seats were empty, swaying slightly as they passed the apex of the wheel. The control booth was dark, the big padlock still firmly in place. This wasn't possible. Rides don't just turn themselves on. As I watched, transfixed, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In one of the passing seats, just for a moment, I could have sworn I saw someone, a small figure, like a child, head turned to watch me as it glided by. I blinked, and it was gone. Just another empty seat. I ran back to the security office, my breath coming in short gasps. I called my supervisor, babbling about haunted Ferris wheels and ghost children. He sounded groggy, annoyed. Jake, there's no way the Ferris wheel is running. It's probably just the wind making it turn a little. Go check the breaker box if you're so worried. I wanted to argue, to make him understand that this was no gentle rotation caused by the wind. But I knew how it sounded, so I just mumbled in agreement and hung up. The breaker box for the main rides is in a little shed behind the scrambler. As I approached, keyring jangling nervously in my hand, I noticed something odd. The padlock on the shed door was hanging open. I distinctly remembered locking it at the start of my shift. With shaking hands, I pulled the door open. The breaker box was right there, its dull metal face normally covered in switches, all firmly in the off position, except they weren't off. Every single switch was flipped to on. I stared, uncomprehending. I couldn't have missed this. I checked the breakers at the start of every shift. It's the first thing I do. A sound behind me made me whirl around, heart in my throat. There, in the open doorway of the shed, stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, wearing an old-fashioned dress that looked like something out of a black and white photo. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the moonlight. "Do you want to play?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in the small space. I opened my mouth to respond, to ask who she was, how she got in here, but no sound came out. The girl smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that sent shivers down my spine. "Tag," she said. "You're it?" And then she was gone, there one moment, and simply not there the next, like smoke dissipating in the wind. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran like hell back to the security office, locked the door, and spent the rest of my shift huddled in front of the CCTV monitors. But the cameras showed nothing. No little girl, no moving rides, just empty park grounds, still and silent in the night. When the morning crew arrived, I tried to tell them what had happened. They laughed it off, told me I must have dozed off and had a nightmare. The Ferris wheel was still, the breaker switches all firmly off. No evidence of anything unusual. I almost believed them, almost convinced myself it had been some sort of stress-induced hallucination. But then it happened again, and again. Each night, a different ride would come to life. The carousel, horses bobbing up and down to music only I could hear. The roller coaster, cars rattling along empty tracks. The funhouse, lights flickering in patterns that made my eyes hurt to look at. And always, just at the edge of my vision, glimpses of children, laughing, playing, beckoning me to join them. But when I turned to look directly at them, they vanished. I started dreading my shifts. The long, dark hours stretched out before me, filled with mechanical groans and phantom laughter. I begged my supervisor to check the security footage, to stay at night and see for himself. But the cameras never picked up anything unusual, and he refused to waste time on ghost stories. Last night was the worst yet. As I made my rounds, I realized that every ride in the park was running. The air was filled with a cacophony of music and machinery, a nightmare symphony of an amusement park in full swing. But there were no visitors, no operators, just the rides, going through their motions for an audience of shadows and moonlight. And the children were everywhere, no longer hiding, no longer vanishing when I looked at them. They ran between the rides, laughing and shouting. Some waved at me as they passed, their eyes too bright, their smiles too wide. One of them, a little boy in knee pants and a newsboy cap, ran up to me. His hand was cold as ice when he grabbed mine. "Come on, mister," he said, tugging me towards the tilt-a-whirl. "It's your turn to ride." I tried to pull away, but his grip was impossibly strong. As he dragged me forward, I saw the other children gathering around, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "You've watched us play for so long," the little girl from the shed said, materializing in front of me. "Now it's time for you to join us." Forever, I don't remember how I got away. Everything after that is a blur of running and screaming, of small hands grabbing at my clothes, and childish laughter echoing in my ears. I came to my senses huddled in the security office, the door barricaded with a chair. I quit this morning, handed in my keys, told them they couldn't pay me enough to spend another night in this place. They think I'm crazy. Hell, maybe I am. But as I was leaving, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. To maintenance guys, talking about the history of the park. "Yeah, it's built on the site of that old orphanage," one was saying. "The one that burned down back in the 20s. Killed a bunch of kids, didn't it?" "Sure did," his buddy replied. "They say you can still hear Em sometimes, laughing and playing like they're still here." I walked away fast, not wanting to hear any more. But I couldn't shake the image of those children, forever young, forever trapped in a nightmarish parody of fun and games. So if you're ever driving by a Willow Grove amusement park late at night, and you see the lights on, the rides moving, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look too closely at the small figures running between the attractions. Because in Willow Grove, the fun never stops. And once you join the party, you might never leave. Story 18. I always thought the worst thing about living in a basement apartment would be the lack of natural light. Turns out, there are far darker things lurking beneath the floorboards than just shadows. My name's Sarah, and until 3 weeks ago, I was your typical grad student just trying to make ends meet in the big city. When I found the listing for a cheap basement apartment in a decent neighborhood, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Sure, it was a little damp and the windows were tiny, but beggars can't be choosers, right? The first few days were fine. I got settled in, arranged my pitiful collection of second-hand furniture, and tried to ignore the musty smell that seemed to permeate everything. It wasn't home, but it was mine. Then the whispers started. It was subtle at first, so faint I thought I was imagining it. Just the barest hint of voices, like a radio playing in another room. I'd press my ear to the walls, trying to figure out where it was coming from, but it always seemed to stop the moment I really focused on it. I told myself it was just the pipes. Old buildings make weird noises, right? Nothing to worry about. But it got louder, clearer. And it always seemed to happen when I was alone, usually late at night when I was trying to study. One night, about a week after I moved in, I finally made out what they were saying. I was at my desk, poring over some impossibly dense text on neurochemistry, when I heard it clear as day. She's up late again. Must be a hard worker. I froze, my highlighter hovering over the page. The voice had been male, middle-aged maybe, with a slight accent I couldn't place. She, came another voice, female this time. She'll hear you. I spun around in my chair, heart pounding. Hello, I called out, feeling ridiculous. Is someone there? Silence. Just the hum of my ancient refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. I shook my head, laughing nervously. Get it together, Sarah, I muttered. You're losing it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, studied, like I was some kind of lab rat in an experiment I didn't know I was part of. The next day, I asked my landlord about the other tenants in the building. He looked at me strange. Other tenants? Honey, you're the only one living here right now. Been meaning to renovate the upstairs, but haven't gotten around to it. I felt a chill run down my spine. If I was alone in the building, where were the voices coming from? That night, I set up my phone to record while I slept. I felt silly doing it, like one of those ghost hunters on TV, but I needed to know I wasn't going crazy. The next morning, I played back the recording with shaking hands. For the first few hours, nothing. Just the normal sounds of a sleeping apartment. But then, around 3 a.m., I heard it. Look at her, sleeping so peacefully. The same male voice from before. Doesn't she remind you of Jenny? Don't start, the female voice replied, sounding sad. You know we can't get attached. Not again. I know. But it's been so long since we've had company. Don't you miss it? Of course I do. But you know the rules. We watch. We listen. We don't interfere. The conversation continued, but it faded out, like they were moving away from wherever my phone was picking up the sound. I sat there, staring at my phone, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. There was no one else in the building, no one living, at least. The thought sent a shiver through me. Was I living in a haunted apartment? Were these ghosts? I spent the next few days in a daze, jumping at every sound, constantly looking over my shoulder. The voices continued, sometimes clear, sometimes just on the edge of hearing. They seemed to be discussing me, my habits, my life, like I was some kind of fascinating specimen they were observing. I tried to ignore it. Told myself I was stressed, sleep deprived, hearing things. But deep down, I knew this was real. It all came to a head last night. I was in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The voices had been particularly active, discussing my failed date from earlier in the evening. Poor thing, the female voice was saying. That boy didn't deserve her anyway. True, the male voice replied. But she seems so lonely. Maybe we could. No, the female voice said sharply. You know we can't. Remember what happened last time? I couldn't take it anymore. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. Who are you? I shouted into the darkness. What do you want from me? For a long moment there was silence. Then, softly, so close it could have been right next to my ear. Oh dear. I think she can hear us. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for the light switch. As the room flooded with harsh fluorescent light, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, emerging from my wall, was a face. Translucent, flickering like an old film projection, but undeniably there. It was the face of a middle-aged man, his eyes sad and kind. Hello, Sarah, he said, his voice the one I'd been hearing for weeks. I'm sorry we frightened you. That wasn't our intention. I pressed myself against the opposite wall, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. What are you? Another face appeared, this one a woman about the same age as the man were. Well, I suppose you'd call us ghosts. Though that's not entirely accurate. We're more like echoes, the man said. Imprints left behind by those who lived here before. But the landlord said no one's lived here, I stammered. The woman smiled sadly. No one living? No. This building is much older than it appears. We've been here. Well, longer than we care to remember. We watch, the man said. We listen. It's all we can do, really. We're not meant to interact, but it's been so long, the woman finished. So long since anyone could hear us, could see us. I felt my fear beginning to ebb, replaced by a strange sort of curiosity. Why me? Why can I see you when no one else could? They exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, the man spoke. You're sensitive, open, like Jenny was. Jenny, I asked, remembering the name from their earlier conversation. The woman's face crumpled with sorrow. Our daughter. She lived here long ago. She could see us too, but it didn't end well. A chill ran down my spine. What happened to her? She tried to join us, the man said, his voice heavy with regret. Thought she could cross over, be with us forever. I felt my breath catch in my throat. And did she? The woman shook her head. No, she just ceased, became nothing, neither here nor there. We lost her completely. That's why we can't interfere, the man said. Why we just watch. The living aren't meant to mingle with, whatever we are. I sank down onto my bed, my mind reeling. So what happens now? Do I just live here, knowing you're watching me all the time? They looked at each other again, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, the woman spoke. That's up to you, Sarah. We can fade back. Be quiet. You'll never hear from us again. Or, the man said, a hint of hope in his voice, you could talk to us. Sometimes, when you're lonely. We've seen so much over the years. We could tell you stories, give you advice, be friends of a sort. I should have been terrified. Should have run screaming from the apartment, never to return. but something in their eyes, in the sadness and loneliness of their voices, touched me. One, "I think I'd like that," I heard myself say. Their faces lit up with a joy that was almost painful to see. "Really?" the woman asked. "You're not afraid?" I laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Oh, I'm terrified, but also curious, and maybe a little lonely too." So that's how I ended up with 2 ghost roommates, or echo roommates, or whatever they are. It's been a week now, and I'm still getting used to it. Sometimes I'll be making coffee and hear a helpful tip about the best way to grind the beans. Or I'll be struggling with a paper and suddenly get a fascinating historical anecdote that fits perfectly into my thesis. It's weird and more than a little creepy sometimes, but it's also nice, knowing I'm not alone. Having someone or something to talk to when the world feels too big and too lonely. But I'm careful. I remember their warning about Jenny. I know there's a line that can't be crossed, a boundary between their world and mine that must be respected. So if you're ever looking for an apartment and you find a great deal on a basement unit, maybe think twice, because you never know who or what might be living in the walls. And once you start listening to the whispers, it's awfully hard to stop. Story 19. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but the ones I took that night in the desert, they tell a story I wish I'd never seen. My name's Alex, and I guess I was, a professional photographer. Nature shots, mostly. The kind of stuff you see on postcards or in travel magazines. Sunsets over canyons, star trails above mountain peaks, that sort of thing. It was supposed to be a routine shoot. Death Valley National Park, capturing the Milky Way over the salt flats. I've done it a dozen times before. Set up my gear, wait for full dark, and let the camera work its magic. But that night was different. I arrived at the Badwater Basin just before sunset, the vast expanse of white salt stretching out before me like a frozen ocean. The air was still brutally hot, shimmering with mirages on the horizon. As I set up my tripod, I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, trickling down my back. "It's going to be a scorcher tonight," I muttered to myself, checking my water supply for the 100th time. Dehydration's no joke out here. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I felt that familiar thrill of anticipation. There's something magical about watching day turn to night in the desert. The way the colors fade, the stars flickering to life, one by one. By the time full darkness fell, I was ready. Camera mounted, settings dialed in, remote shutter in hand. I started with some test shots, 30-second exposures to check my framing and focus. The first few images looked good. The Milky Way arched across the sky, a river of stars pouring over the dark silhouettes of distant mountains. The salt flats below reflected the starlight, creating an otherworldly mirror effect. But as I flicked through the images on my camera's screen, something caught my eye. A dark shape on the horizon, barely visible against the starry backdrop. I frowned, zooming in. It looked almost like a person, standing far out on the salt flats. "That's weird," I said aloud, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness. "There shouldn't be anyone else out here, not at this hour." I took another shot, this time for a full minute. When I checked the image, my breath caught in my throat. The figure was closer now, its outline more distinct against the star-filled sky. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing across the empty basin. No response. Just the soft crunch of salt under my feet and the faint whisper of wind. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the light, maybe, or some kind of camera glitch. But a nagging sense of unease had taken root in the pit of my stomach. I took another shot. 90 seconds this time. My hands were shaking slightly as I pulled up the image. The figure was definitely closer, and now I could make out details. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long and thin to be human. Its head was oddly shaped, elongated and sharp. "Nope," I said, shaking my head. "Nope, nope, nope, this isn't happening." But even as I said it, I knew this was real. Whatever that thing was, it was out there, and it was coming towards me. I should have packed up right then, should have run for my car and never looked back. But there was a part of me, the part that had spent years chasing the perfect shot, that couldn't resist. I had to know. So I set up for another exposure. 2 minutes this time, the longest I'd ever attempted. Those 2 minutes felt like an eternity. I stood there, remote in hand, straining my eyes to see anything in the darkness beyond my little pool of light. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to my growing terror. When the shutter finally closed, I almost dropped the camera in my haste to see the image. It was there, clear as day, a figure that could not possibly be human, standing no more than 100 yards away. Its body was a twisted mass of sharp angles and 2 long limbs. Where its face should have been was just emptiness, a void darker than the night sky, and it was looking right at me. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the tripod. I went down hard, the salt stinging my palms as I caught myself. The camera crashed to the ground beside me, the lens shattering with a sound like breaking ice. In the sudden silence that followed, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic crunching, footsteps on the salt flats, coming closer. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. I grabbed my backpack, leaving the broken camera behind. As I turned to run, my flashlight beam swept across the flats. For just a second, I saw it. A glimpse of something tall and wrong, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. Then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I ran like I'd never run before, the salt crunching under my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear it behind me, that steady, crunching, getting closer, closer. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. As I yanked the door open, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. I turned, against my better judgment, and saw it. It stood at the edge of my headlights, a silhouette of impossible angles and empty spaces. As I watched, frozen in terror, it raised a hand. Long, spindly fingers unfurled, reaching towards me. I threw myself into the car, slamming the door and gunning the engine. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The thing was there, in the middle of the road, growing smaller as I sped away. But just before it disappeared from view, I could have sworn I saw it wave. A friendly goodbye, like we were old pals parting ways after a night out. I drove straight through until morning, not stopping until I was well out of Death Valley. When I finally pulled over at a gas station, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the pump. It wasn't until I was back in my apartment, doors locked and curtains drawn, that I remembered my memory card. In my panic, I'd left the camera behind, but the card was still in my pocket. With trembling fingers, I slotted it into my laptop. The images loaded slowly, each one making my heart race faster. There it was, the progression of that thing, moving across the salt flats, getting closer with each shot. In the final image, the one taken just before my camera was destroyed, I could see details I'd missed in the moment. Its body wasn't just oddly shaped, it was wrong. Like someone had taken a human form and twisted it, stretched it, rearranged it into something that should not be. And its face, Where its face should have been was a swirling vortex of stars. Like a piece of the night sky had been cut out and pasted onto this nightmare creature. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, in every single image, no matter how far away it was, its head was turned, looking directly at the camera. At me. I deleted the photos, snapped the memory card in half for good measure. But it doesn't matter. Those images are burned into my brain, as clear as if they were projected on the backs of my eyelids. I don't go out at night anymore. Can't stand to look at the stars, because every time I do, I see that thing, standing there in the desert, waving goodbye, waiting. I've tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that it was just a hallucination brought on by dehydration and isolation. But deep down, I know the truth. Something is out there in the dark. Something that doesn't belong in our world. And it knows I saw it. Knows I have proof of its existence, even if that proof now only exists in my memories. Sometimes, on nights when the sky is particularly clear, I think I see movement outside my window. A flash of something too tall, too angular to be human. And I wonder, did I really escape that night? Or did I just bring something back with me? Something that's been waiting, patiently, for the right moment to step out of the shadows and into my world. So if you're ever out in the desert at night, taking photos of the stars, pay attention to your shots. Really look at them. Because you never know what might be hiding in the background, slowly making its way towards you. And if you see something that shouldn't be there, something tall and wrong and empty-faced, don't wait around to get a better shot. Run, and pray it doesn't follow you home. Because some things are better left unphotographed, and some nights, the dark should stay dark. Story 20. I always thought the scariest part of working retail was dealing with angry customers. Turns out there are far worse things lurking in the aisles after closing time. My name's Mike, and I've been working at Mayfield's department store for the past 3 years. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Or at least it did, until that night. Now, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to set foot in a store again, let alone work in one. It was a Tuesday evening, nothing special about it. I was on closing shift, which meant staying an hour after the last customer left to tidy up and get the store ready for the morning crew. We'd had a big sale that day, so the place was a mess. Clothes strewn across fitting rooms, makeup testers smeared on every available surface, the usual chaos. As I was straightening a rack of sweaters in the women's department, I heard the final announcement over the PA system. Attention Mayfield shoppers, the time is now 9 p.m. and our store is closed. Please make your final selections and proceed to the checkout. Thank you for shopping at Mayfield's, and have a wonderful evening. I sighed, glancing at my watch. One more hour, then I could go home and binge watch that new Netflix series everyone was talking about. The store emptied out pretty quickly. A few stragglers at the checkout, a couple arguing over whether they really needed another set of towels. By 9:15, the place was silent, except for the soft music playing over the speakers. I made my way through the departments, straightening displays and picking up discarded items. The store always felt different after hours. Bigger somehow, the shadows longer, the silence more. Expectant. I was in the kitchenware section, reordering a set of pans some indecisive shopper had left in disarray when I heard it. A soft thud, like something heavy being set down on a counter. I froze, straining my ears. It had come from the direction of the home goods department. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin in the cavernous space. "Store's closed. You need to leave." No response. Just that soft music and the hum of fluorescent lights. I shook my head, laughing nervously. Get it together, Mike, I muttered. You're letting this place get to you. But as I turned back to the pans, I heard it again. This time, it sounded like fabric rustling, like someone rifling through clothes. My heart started to beat a little faster. We'd had problems with shoplifters before, people hiding in the store until after closing. But something about this felt different. I grabbed a heavy ceramic mug from a nearby display, holding it like a weapon as I made my way towards Home Goods. The sound grew louder as I approached. Definitely someone going through clothes. But there was something off about the rhythm of it. Too fast, too frantic. I rounded the corner into the department and stopped dead in my tracks. There, in the middle of the bedding section, was a figure. It was hunched over, its back to me, tearing through a pile of sheets with inhuman speed. "Hey," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We're closed. You need to leave now." The figure stopped moving. Slowly, so slowly, it began to turn. I felt the mug slip from my nerveless fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Because what faced me wasn't human, not even close. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its body was wrong, all sharp angles and 2 long limbs. But its face, where a face should have been, was just smooth, featureless skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just nothing. For a long moment, we just stood there, facing each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, in a voice that sounded like rustling paper and creaking hinges, it spoke. "I'm looking for the perfect set. Do you have anything in grey?" I ran, dropped the mug, turned on my heel, and ran like hell. I could hear it behind me, that weird rustling sound, those 2 fast footsteps. I sprinted through the store, knocking over displays, scattering clothes and accessories in my wake. But no matter how fast I ran, those footsteps stayed right behind me. I reached the main doors, yanking on the handles. Locked. Of course they were locked. I always locked them after the last customer left. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. The footsteps were getting closer, that rustling sound now punctuated by a weird, high-pitched keening. Just as my fingers closed around the right key, I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck. I spun around, pressing my back against the doors. The thing stood there, looming over me. This close, I could see that its skin wasn't skin at all, but a shifting, swirling mass of receipts, price tags. The detritus of 1,000 shopping trips, somehow formed into a vaguely humanoid shape. It leaned in close, that featureless face just inches from mine. And then, to my horror, a mouth opened. Not where a mouth should be, but in the center of its chest. A ragged, torn hole filled with rows upon rows of jagged teeth. "I'd like to speak to your manager," it said, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 dissatisfied customers speaking at once. I screamed, a primal, terrified sound that echoed through the empty store. And as if in response, every light in the place went out at once. In the sudden darkness, I felt those cold, papery hands grab me. I thrashed and kicked, but its grip was impossibly strong. I felt myself being lifted, carried deeper into the store. "Let me go," I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. "Please, I don't understand what you want." The thing's chest mouth opened again, wider this time. "What every customer wants, Mike. Satisfaction guaranteed." As it carried me past the customer service desk, I caught a glimpse of the security monitors. What I saw made my blood run cold. The store wasn't empty. Every department was filled with things. Creatures made of clothes and mannequin parts. of shopping bags and coat hangers, all of them moving, searching, consuming. And in every shot, in the background, I could see myself, being carried by that thing, my face a mask of terror. But it wasn't just me now. It was me a minute ago, me 5 minutes ago, me an hour ago, straightening that rack of sweaters. Somehow, impossibly, I was watching myself relive this night, over and over and over again. The thing carried me into the stockroom, past rows of shelves stacked high with boxes. In the center of the room was something, a swirling vortex of barcodes and price stickers, of flashing sale signs and neon open lights. "Your customer satisfaction survey, Mike," the thing said, its chest mouth grinning wider. "We do hope you've enjoyed your Mayfield's shopping experience." As it lifted me towards that swirling mass of retail chaos, I had one last, horrifying realization. This wasn't the first time this had happened. This wasn't even the 100th time. I'd been here before. Again and again and again. Always the last one in the store. Always the final, eternal customer. The vortex engulfed me, and I felt myself being torn apart and reassembled. My bones became clothes hangers, my skin turned to receipt paper, my blood replaced with markdown ink. And then I was back on the sales floor, straightening that same rack of sweaters, hearing that final announcement over the PA system. "Attention Mayfields, shoppers, the time is now 9 p.m. and our store is closed. Please make your final selections and proceed to the checkout. Thank you for shopping at Mayfield's, and have a wonderful evening." I wanted to scream, to run, to warn myself, but I couldn't. All I could do was watch as another me began the cycle again. Because in Mayfield's, the customer is always right. The sale never ends. And the store is never truly closed. So the next time you're shopping late and you hear that final announcement, don't dawdle. Don't browse just one more rack. Get out, and get out fast. Because you never know when you might become the last customer. The one the store decides to keep forever.